Testing, testing. Is my microphone working?
It is working. Is
Awesome.
mine working?
Yes, it is.
Your answer.
Yeah, it's working. It's all good.
I'm just making sure I have everything that I want to go over.
Yeah. Oh, I think I asked a question in Conclave. Let me see if someone answered it. Yes.
About
Okay.
about the slides, no, you don't. The funny thing about it, everyone's slides are actually a little bit different, which I find funny. Mine is, or anyone who did, mine is mostly big pictures, and my main message is speaking. Tommy's looks very modern and formal, kind of. Yeah, but once people speak, Grant, then probably want people to just so people speaking can. But Tommy's is all formal and nice looking, and Aubrey's is all colorful and happy looking. So my pictures, Tommy's is formal, Aubrey's is colorful. That's the irony. But I kind of like it that way. I like it that we're each speaking about different things, but at the same time, we're each doing it a different way, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Could we go on like face call? Because I don't know, whenever I'm acting and like doing NPCs, I do a lot of facial expressions and movements.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna turn my camera once I do it. I'm just making sure that I have other stuff.
All right, I'm gonna make sure my camera's working actually.
I forgot I had stuff to where people have to admit to join. So now I'm sitting here like, admit.
You can fix that by turning off waiting room.
Is waiting room just let you turn it off somewhere?
Yeah, it's under security.
Security. No waiting room. I like how I did it right as someone else joined. That's the irony. Now we just wait till 12:30. Let me make sure I remember everything that I'm going to talk about at the beginning.
Yes, cat? Yes, cat? Meow.
Please pet your cat for me.
Yes. Hold on. Let me put on video so you can see the cat potentially. There it is. You come here and see cat.
Cat.
That's a big cat. Or is it
That
just
is
close to camera?
What?
Is it close to camera or is it just that big? Wait, I'm trying to...
I think we're just close to the camera.
Hi, cat.
Funny side cat story. So my dad is allergic to cats. And when I was in elementary school, I became friends with a person. His name was Jared. And so one day it was, you're a kid, want to go over to your friend's house. All right, go over to his friend's house. Turns out Jared has 2 cats. My parents had no idea about this. And so I'm there messing around with like the cats playing. I come back home and my dad was like, all right, how was it, Jared? So I'm like, oh, it's got 2 cats. And he's like, are you okay? Because he freaked out because I don't have anything I'm allergic to, but they suspect if there was one thing I was going to be, it would be cats just because him and other people in his family, at least I think about somewhere between a third and a half of his family are allergic to cats. And so that's why this freaked him the fuck out, because here I am about 3 years old, and that's a rough time to figure out you're allergic to something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he was terrified. Like there's very few things in my life that I've seen that made my dad like that worried.
Yeah.
That and the time that we were on a motorboat and I fell off the front of it. But we're not going to go to that.
Hopefully it wasn't moving.
It was moving on a lake.
Oh, God.
I came out the end, nothing, untouched, everything but my dad. I think those are the 2 times I've seen my dad most terrified.
Mm.
If you want to know context, I was like 5 or 6 years old and I was stupid trying to lean over and touch the water. Yeah, we're all stupid at that age.
Yeah.
I can touch the water. Whoops!
Now I'm dead.
I mean, for a motorboat, if I had, like, determining, like, how I fell, it could have killed me. Just the motor.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
The bright side, my dad was driving. I think he turned off the moment I fell over. I don't know because I was underwater. I mean, what am I supposed to know? All I know is I fell down there and I was like, oops. And they were like, are you alive?
Ah. No.
I'm excited for this. Also because I'm excited, the mild irony, the getaway prize has been sitting in my room and I haven't touched it because technically it's not mine. You know, I bought it, it's just sitting there the whole time. I feel like that's such an awkward thing when it's like if you bought like a gift for someone, but you like it yourself, but it's something that you're not wrapping, so it's just sitting there. And it's like, yeah, I know you want me, but I'm not yours.
At this point, you may as well buy another copy.
The thing is, I have it on D&D Beyond the thing, so it's like, then again, stupid story on my part. So I ran Rime of the Frostman recently. I have Rime of the Frostman as a book. I have it on Roll20. I also have it on D&D Beyond. I bought it 3 separate places.
You should do a nice little read along for all of us in here for the prize book.
There's actually an interesting part that I would want to read aloud, but it's something that, as much as I want to read this, basically there is an interesting NPC in it as part. Yes, you can tell it's kind of an adventure book, but that the NPC in it, I don't want to read out loud because then if any player were to run it, they'd be spoiled for how awesome of an NPC this is. I can give you a hint. Take a creature which you would not usually consider to be an NPC and give them a certain magic item which greatly increases their intelligence.
Ah, fun.
And also their name is adorable. They didn't really have a name. They changed their name based on an event of their past.
So what book is this?
Well, like 1230ish, I'm going to tell. I can say that it's a recent book. If that's not going to be obvious enough. Just we like someone that I told that, and they said, "Is it a witch?" They were thinking it's Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which I've got news for you. That isn't out yet.
Oh, that's a secret. You got the scoop on the new book. Clearly.
It's Barrage!
Hello.
Oh.
The legend has arrived. We can officially begin.
Well, I'm still waiting till 12:30, just because I know 1 or 2 people told me that they're going to be here at 12:30 because they are getting lunch. Why didn't you just eat earlier?
I just got lunch. That's why I'm here.
I'm currently eating lunch. I'm demolishing some panda right now.
Okay, I guess a good question. Will there be any breaks during this?
Yes, because I'm going to restate this, but I don't mind, I guess, restating it because that's what DMs do anyway. That there's going to be 2 presenting, and then it's going to go from one to the other, but the amount of time for presenter for each one, I don't expect them to use that exact amount of time. They may go over. They may go a bit short. If they go a bit short, then it's up to them if the next person is, I'm ready, or if that person presenting wants to just take questions for the last 5-10 minutes or whatever, then they can do so. And during that time, I would say that's probably the best break time.
Okay.
Because I expect mine, even though the time I have allotted, I expect I'll probably finish mine with 8-ish minutes to spare somewhere, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Not 100% sure though.
All this stuff will also be recorded. So if you
Yes.
want to sit out a session because you need a break, you can always just tune back into the recording later and watch it.
I've had, the recording
I'm
things I had a
trying
lot
to
of
figure out
class messaging me. They were like, I can't attend, but I want to. I'm like, well, it's being recorded.
That's nice.
It's 2021. Everything's recorded.
Yeah. And I think I can stay present. My kitchen is right over there. But if I do that, I would be cooking something. So.
Plot twist turns into a cooking show. What are we going over? We're going over what is it? The book they released, the Hero's Feast cookbook. I got that for my mom for Christmas. And she enjoyed reading it, but she came up to me and she asked me, Tyler, what's the difference between an elf and a drow? And I was like,
wow, what a normie.
what's the difference between an elf and a drow? Mom, that's a longer answer than you want. I would just say that one's darker than the other, but then that's like so superficial an answer. That's... I should have told one's underground. I should have said that. One's underground, the other isn't. Why? I don't know. They just have some bad history together.
Also, one of them has to do with spiders.
Yes. See, one of them condones slavery. Bad. All right, I guess it is 12:30. So
One of them owns slaves, but it's fine because they're black.
So, just to make sure I have my notes now. We have 13 people. That's enough. So everyone knows. Welcome that we are now going to do Dungeon Masters Conclave, and the idea of this, someone about Zach actually about how many months ago was this suggested?
Probably about 2 months ago. Mm-hmm.
2 months ago was suggested, and I'm happy that now we're doing it. And the main thing to keep in mind is that when the person who's presenting is speaking, if you can mute. I know it feels weird because usually teachers are like, oh, unmute yourself and speak, but no, actually mute for them to speak. But if you want to say something or you want to address something, hey, that's what the chat's for. And so next thing is, what are all the topics that people are going to be going over? I'll be going first, and I'm just going to be going over what is the role of the DM, what are elements of a good adventure, what is the role of rules in your game, what is a session 0, and a few other things. Then after I finish, Zach is going to go over world building, which should be pretty awesome because I don't know anything about world building, honestly, because I just run campaigns and just change them usually. Then after Zach, Rachel is going to be talking about NPCs, how to make them interesting, make them unique, make them realistic, how to make them basically a bigger part of your campaign because they should be. Then after that, Aubrey is going to be going over creating your own modules and adventures and how you can get inspiration to do such that, examples of one that she's done, as well as information about improvisation. And then after that, the man himself, Barrage, is going to be talking about building encounters and building encounters. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then after Barrage, finally, Tommy is going to be speaking about running encounters. So after they've been built, how to run them. And this is being recorded also. I've already said that earlier, and usually if you have any questions, that's what the chat is for, if you have any. Information about the prize. Okay, so after the conclave is done, there's going to be a link put in the Zoom chat, which is for a form that's asking for your input about the conclave and just what you learned from it, what did you attend. It's not like, I'm not a teacher, I'm not grading, but it's more just so we can get input that possibly can be used for the future. And after the conclave, after that form, and if you have to leave early, send me a private message on Discord, and I will send you a link to the form. The prize we're giving away is something that I think personally, if you're a new or an old experienced Dungeon Master, this will help you greatly because we have a hardcover copy of Candlekeep Mysteries that has been barely touched. It's really sad in the box. That the reason why we're doing this is because it has a bunch of short adventures in it, some of which I've read. So if you're an experienced DM and you just want to throw a little side adventure for one session, boom. If you're a new DM and you just need some adventure to start, boom. If you just want 17 adventures, also boom. Also has some unique monsters and magic items that are never before seen. Some which are kind of powerful and interesting. And then for the second place prizes, we have two sets of, I probably should get closer to the camera, 2 sets of orange dice that we have. And what time is it? It is 7:34. Does anyone have any questions beforehand? Will you need to be on campus if your name is drawn? Preferably yes. And that brings up preferably yes, be on campus, or if needed, I could probably find a way to mail it to you, but if your name is drawn and you're not on campus, it might be harder for me to get it to you. But another question that someone else private messaged me earlier, if, for example, let's say that your name is drawn and you get the book, but you want dice. You don't want book, you want dice. And let's say that someone else is drawn and they get dice. If you want to talk to them and possibly say, hey, I'll take your prize, you take my prize, that is entirely fine. Because I know that some people, even though the book is the grand prize, I know some people would prefer dice over it. I understand that. Everyone has things they like more or not. Is there any other questions, or is that all? I'm going to guess no, because I don't see any in chat. Let me make sure then that I have my stuff open for my presentation. Click, clack, math rocks, yes. Let me make sure I can screen share this. Share screen. This works. Cheers. Did that work? I hope that worked. I think it worked. Wow. Better than I thought it was going to be. For some reason, now I cannot see the chat. Ha ha ha, I just mean myself. That's not showing me chat. Oh, there's the chat. See, now I know what the professors must struggle with. Okay, so we're going to be talking about and now I realize now I have it set where I can't see anyone else's faces except myself. This is top-notch design, Zoom. Top-notch design. Top-notch. I've got two monitors for a reason now there. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about, oh, hi, Corey. We're going to be talking about the role of the Dungeon Master. And I know that some people here have been a Dungeon Master, some may have not been. If you haven't, I'm just going to personally say you should be, or you should at least, not you should be, but you should at least consider it, because it is a fun experience, because not only do you get to tell fantastic stories or facilitate that, but you also get to create the world in which these events happen. And so a question that is often asked, and it's a loaded question because it can't be answered shortly, is, yes, first is official, that what exactly is a Dungeon Master? And if someone asked me that, my answer would simply be, they are the creative force behind a D&D game. They create the world for other players to explore, and they also create and run adventures that drive the story. And adventures they don't have to always go this way, but most hinge on successful completion of a quest. And they can be as short as a single game session, or some adventures can be long, drawn-out conflicts, discoveries, which might take multiple game sessions to resolve. And this is then what usually is a campaign, which I don't know, but there's somewhere online read the longest campaign that some campaigns have gone for really, really long amount of time. And also I'd say that the Dungeon Master's role it's built of a bunch of smaller roles. And the first role I would say is that the Dungeon Master is an architect of the campaign. They create the adventures, the monsters, the traps, the NPCs, the treasure too, that the players discover. They quite literally build it and set it up and come up with the designs for everything. The DM is also a storyteller. They help the players visualize what's happening around them. They make it come to life. And this often, no matter how much you want to go ahead and write stuff out ahead of time, this often will include improvisation, because I can assure you, no matter how much you plan and you think your players are going to do something, they will do something unplanned and unexpected. They will. It's just kind of one of those facts of life. They will. The DM is also an actor / a role player as well as the players. You play the roles of the monsters, the supporting characters. Even technically, you play the role of a door slamming shut. You play the role of the universe in it. That's the best way I can think to put it. You breathe life and you play the role of the universe. Everything that is not the players. And you are also a referee. You interpret the rules. You decide when to abide by them, when to change them, when to ignore them, and when additional rules might be needed. And every DM of these roles, every DM handles it differently. And usually some prefer one role over the other. Some really like to add additional rules. Some really like to tell the story. And in the end, Dungeons & Dragons is a hobby, and it should be fun. You should want to focus on the aspects that you enjoy and are good at. And some people, that's part of what I think makes a good DM, if you can improve with what you already have. And what is your goal as being a DM? By the way, you can read the text there. That's just my opinion. That the rules, how can I put this saying? The goal of being a DM, how can you be good, is that if you have a session and you make everyone want to come back after the session and keep doing that, then you're achieving the goal of being a good DM. Now, your goal shouldn't be to make things difficult for your players. It could be, depending on what's there, but if you get everyone to come back and you're trying to improve, then you're doing well. Now, if you're a team of horrors, some people could argue, yes, your goal is to kind of punish the adventurers a little bit, but in my opinion, that's still a great adventure. And the next thing that we're going to talk about, what are the elements of a great adventure? How do you make an adventure great? How do you make it so that players don't start building dice towers, or they don't start getting bored, or start thinking about, what's on my phone? So creating adventures is one of the best parts about being a dungeon master. And I'm not counting rolling dice for no reason or asking players if they're sure they want to do something, because those are also fun parts. But creating adventures is how you express yourself. When you design adventure, you are calling the shots. Sometimes this adventure, as I've said before, is a single session. Other times it's an entire campaign. And when you create adventure, you are blending lots of elements of exploration, social interaction, combat into a unified creation that meets the needs of your players. And so some people tell you don't need a Dungeon Master's Guide to be a DM, and it's got helpful stuff in there, but there's one section in it that I've read, and that's what I'm going to be about to go over, that is honestly, I think, one of the best parts, and it's elements of a great adventure. Because whether you're running a written adventure that's pre-written or whether you're making your own, just being aware of what elements help make an adventure good, make it stick out, is, helpful. And so the first thing of a good adventure is a credible threat. You need something that is a threat big enough that it's worthy of the hero's attention. Regular people do not become heroes or adventurers. And you need something that they'd want to step up to. And sometimes this threat is a single villain, a monster, or other times it can be an organization. It could be a boy, a Serac, or it can be a disease, a group of cultists, some sort of antagonist. It does not always have to be a big monster. And the issue that some adventurers run into is they think, oh, you need a BBEG, and they have that BBEG be some guy in a dark room you don't meet until the very end. And I would say that's not really a credible threat. You want to make some sort of threat that the players are aware of, so that they understand is dangerous, that they're working against, something that is always there, something they should actually be concerned about. Because if they're not concerned about it, well, I go on the adventure. The next thing is familiar tropes with clever twists. And it might seem kind of stereotypical if you think, my adventure's going to have Dungeons and Dragons. Whoop-de-doo, wow, that's original. But it might have also orcs, crazy wizards, mermaids, whatever, because those are common elements in fantasy. But usually that's a good idea. But you want to expand upon that. Instead of having just the players start in a tavern, have them start in a tavern that's maybe has no gravity. You want to take something familiar to fantasy, a tower, and you want to put your own unique twist on it. For example, you could have it where the person who's giving the adventurers the quests on behalf of the king turns out to actually be the king. You could have it where the crazy wizard or evil person in a tower is actually just a bunch of kobolds that are all 3 kobolds just all wearing a cloak pretending they're a person. Or it might just be a bunch of gnomes that are really just making an illusion of a mage because they just want to scare people and take their loot. Just use elements of fantasy kind of for inspiration, but don't be afraid to just throw your own random twist on it. You also want a clear focus on, yes, it does have an official stat block, a clear focus on the present. You want the adventure to be about the here and now. You might need a little bit of history to set the story in motions, to give the players a little bit of lore on the past. But in general, you want the world's history to be present, to be evident, or tell about the present situation. Instead of dealing with things that happened in the past, you want things to focus on what's happening now. You want to care what the bad guys are up to, what the whole plot is, something that draws the players into the here and now. You don't want to, I just sending a message, not right now, that you want to make sure they're focused on the present. You want to keep that there. The next thing you need, which is one of my personal favorites, you need heroes that matter. You want the adventure to let the adventure's actions and decisions to matter, to be impactful. Even though it might resemble kind of, with doing weekly sessions or whatever, it might resemble more like a novel or TV episodes. You want to allow for more than one outcome. You never want to think that there's only one way players have to do something. Otherwise, you get what is known as being railroaded, where they're set onto an adventure that only has one destination, no matter how hard they try to change it. So if, for example, if you have a major villain show up before the end of the adventure, you should consider the possibility that even if it's small, the heroes could defeat that villain early, and what is that going to do? You shouldn't make it, unless you want to, unless you think it's right, but I would suggest that you at least make them, even if you don't make it so that they can defeat the villain, make it seem possible. Don't try to just, I can throw it to you early, you can't beat it. You need to give players room to their decisions truly impact the world. Yes, it's your world, but it's kind of also theirs. I mean, they're in as well. The next thing that you need, something for all player types. So every person comes to the gaming table with different expectations, different things that they like. They might like exploration, they might like social interaction, combat. Those are the main three. And usually adventures have a balance of them all. And you don't have to appeal to every type of player, but you should try to appeal to every type of player that's at your table. Because if you have a player that doesn't like fighting, maybe you want to have a session where there is no fighting, which I've actually had one or two like that, and it's interesting. Or maybe if you have a player who loves fighting, maybe you can make a session that is lots of fighting, but you want to try to appeal them all. And so that brings up different types of players, and kind of my opinion, or different types of things players like. Because usually the success of a game depends on your ability to entertain the players. Whether you want to, that's a bad way to put it, that your role is to keep them interested, the players. And that's what makes them want to come back, as I said earlier. But knowing what the players like about D&D can help you make the adventure better for them. Because just because you like the adventure doesn't mean they will. And that's why you also probably want to maybe ask them beforehand, what do they like? So you can kind of tailor it to them. Some players like acting. They enjoy getting into their character, speaking their character voices. They really like to role play. They like social interaction with NPCs, even monsters, even fellow party members. The best way to get them interested, give them opportunities to develop that personality. Allow them to regularly interact with NPCs. Allow role-playing to be a part of combat. Allow elements from their background to trickle into the adventure. You also have some players that they like exploring. They love to really search every nook and cranny of the world and see what it has to offer. They want to know what's around the next corner. They want to know, yes, if players are getting bored, yes, you can switch it up. That they want to know what's around the next corner or hill, and they also want to try to find hidden clues, treasure. And so for those type of players, you can drop clues, hints at what's to come. You can let them find things that they only found because they took time to explore. You can provide good descriptions of the environment and use interesting maps or props if that's available to you, or if you're doing it online, images, audio, etc. You can also give monsters certain secrets or unusual details that they might can figure out when they try to search the dead body, or they try to search its lair, things like that. You have some players that they are interested in instigating. They want to make stuff happen, whether for better or worse. Usually, but not always, these are the ones who want to do the risk. The people that you say, are you sure you want to do that? And they just say, yes. Are you sure? Yes. Those are the, not always, but often those are the instigators. They'd rather, they don't see an issue with running into danger. And they are also willing usually to face the consequences. You can engage them by allowing them to affect their surroundings. You can include things which tempt them. You can also let their actions put the rest of the characters in a tight spot. You can add encounters with NPCs that might be just as unpredictable as they are. You can make an NPC that is, if Wild Magic had a personality, you could do that because they might enjoy that. You also have some players, they enjoy fighting. They love fantasy combat. If it were a drug, they would probably be high on it. They will look, sometimes they will look for excuses to start a fight, or I would attack the monster, but he was speaking to you. I don't care. I think he's evil. I'm going to attack him. That can happen. And sometimes you can spring unexpected encounters on them. You can vividly describe the havoc that happens in combat. You can include combat encounters with large numbers of weak monsters, which will make them feel more like, look at me, I'm taking on so many things at once. You can sometimes even interrupt a social interaction with combat. I would be careful to do that, though. It all really does depend on your table. Some players, they love optimizing. They want to make their characters top-notch peak performance. They want to gain levels, get their new features, find magic items. They welcome any opportunity to demonstrate that they are superior, that they are strong. And the best way you can keep them interested, ensure that they do get steady access to new abilities and spells. You can use, if you know they want a particular magic item, if they sent you, ooh, I found this on Instagram, or ooh, I've heard of this, and they like it, you might consider using that item as a story hook. You could include encounters which let their abilities shine. For example, if you have a cleric, and the cleric loves the fact that, I can turn undead. Hey, maybe you throw a bunch of shadows or something at him and just have him wreck them. You can try to provide, how can I put it, quantifiable rewards, things like gold or experience points for non-combat encounters. Because then they might want to optimize their roleplay. Optimize does not always have to be for combat. You can optimize many different ways. You can make someone who literally just optimizes skills. Some players like problem solving. They want to solve problems. They want to try to figure out what every single NPC's motivation is. They want to untangle every villain's secret plan, solve every puzzle, come up with plans of their own. The best way to tailor to them, include encounters that emphasize on this problem solving and reward their planning and their problem solving with actual in-game benefits. Occasionally allow a smart plan of theirs to grant an easy win. For example, taking a bag of holding and putting in extra-dimensional space. That's just a common example, but if they come up with a smart plan and you might think, it's cheesing the enemy or something, sometimes let it go. Let it go, because then it makes them feel that they did their problem solving. It makes them feel happy. Also, you can create NPCs which are very complex. That motives might be hard to figure out, something that they can ponder about in and out of session. And then last of the player types that I think of, storytelling. Some players love storytelling and they want to contribute to the narrative just as much as you're usually expected to. They like it when their characters are heavily invested in an unfolding story, and they enjoy encounters that are tied to the plot. And you can engage them by using their backgrounds to help shape the campaign, making sure encounters advance the story rather than just being an encounter for the sake of an encounter. You can make sure that their actions help steer future events, kind of like the instigators or so. And you can also give NPCs ideals, bonds, and flaws that can be exploited, more utilized, I guess is a better way to put it. But you can also see that as I've gone over these different types of characters, some of them, they counter each other. They say, you said this, but this, and that's why it's also important, know your players. You don't have to appeal to every player, as I said earlier, but you should try to appeal to the ones at your table because they're the ones that input matters. You also want, the other element of a good adventure, you want surprises. You want surprises not to just, ambush and attack your players, unlike these pictures, but to delight them. Throw them something that they might not expect. Turns out that the ruined castle on a hill that they didn't care about actually has the dragon's tomb underneath. They go through the wilderness and they discover a tower that only appears when there's a full moon. Because surprises usually will stick in a player's memory. They'll remember it, and that's great. But if you put too many surprises, it loses its value. You want to add occasional twists, something that pushes the players to maybe adjust their tactics, adjust what they're doing, think creatively, stay engaged. You could end up making it where, if you have a goblin lair, for example, you can make it where it turns out that the goblins have sticks of dynamite or something. Or if you don't want dynamite in your world, maybe they have a goblin spellcaster and something like that. So think about I guess Barrage will probably go more into this, but when you're planning stuff, counter-wise, think of things that maybe go beyond what's just written. Think about things that, this is a will-o-wisp that's actually working with a dragon or something. I don't know. You can also throw them the occasional red herring. Throw them something that they think or they suspect may be something that this actually occurred recently in a one-shot I was in. Being a DM, I know a lot more about monsters than I sometimes wish I knew when I'm a player. They threw me a monster that I assumed to be another monster, and turns out they took the stats and they kind of inversed it. They made it where, this thing does fire damage, make it do cold. It can innately cast Fireball. Well, this one innately casts Lightning Bolt. Throw them red herrings a bit. You want to sometimes throw them things that they think they know what's coming and then don't, because it keeps them on their toes. But once again, as I said earlier, don't go overboard with surprises. If you just constantly throw tons and tons of curveballs, the curveballs lose their merit. They lose their value. Sometimes you could even throw a bunch of surprises and then just throw something that's straightforward, like, a single orc guard is going to fight you. You can do that. Then the next thing, the thing that has been kind of hard to do for me in person, but having COVID or this pandemic has kind of helped me because I can do it digitally. Useful maps. So by useful maps, I don't mean they have to be detailed, but they should be thoughtfully constructed to where, how can I say this? Wilderness, there should be interesting landmarks. You want to make features that stand out, but you also want things to be unknown. You want dungeons to not just be all square rooms that is literally symmetrical. You want things to be unique. And you want the maps also to encourage players to make them realize they have options. Don't make a dungeon, this is my opinion, when you make a dungeon, don't make the dungeon a single linear path. Make it where there's multiple ways, because then players get the situation where they realize, do we go left or do we go right? We have no idea what's down either way. And if drawing maps isn't your strong suit, then welcome to the internet. There's tons of maps on there. There's tons of tools to help you make maps, software, all that's out there. If you can't draw like me, for people who've seen me draw, I had a mat and a marker and I would draw on it. My drawings were hideous. I can't draw. So digital maps, yes, I like them very much. The next thing, Session 0 and social contracts. This is something that, fun fact, this was never put into official thing until they released Tasha's, which I'm so glad, because this is an important topic to me. Session 0s are special sessions that are run before an adventure starts. It's a session where you can establish expectations. You can make sure everyone's on the same page and they know what they're in for. If your campaign is going to have a particular thing in it, it's going to be a particular environment, particular common type of enemy. If you want to make them feel more immersed in it, then Session 0, yes. Session 0 is, I would agree with Zach, it is one of the most important sessions in a campaign. It's an opportunity also to outline a social contract, and if you have any house rules you want, or you can share them. Make players know what you're expecting of them and get an idea of what they're expecting of you, because then you can avoid lots of possible pitfalls. One of my first adventures I ran, I had a person, I didn't realize that they really, really liked animals. And so they found a baby jaguar. What happened in the very next session? It got smashed by a T-Rex. They were very, very, very unhappy. I didn't know that they were that attached to it. If I had known they were attached to it, I would have had it just been injured and not smashed. But that's another thing as a DM you do. You usually don't want to say something, then take it back. And that's also why part of storytelling, as earlier I should have mentioned, choose your words carefully. Choose your words carefully, because sometimes you'll say stuff and not mean to say it, and they will jump to conclusions. You might also accidentally say a monster's name, which that's a discussion if you want them to know what they're against or not. But session zeros are also an opportunity for them to make characters that work well for the campaign. And for example, you might have a full nature campaign and then players make things all for city interactions, or like you want them to make characters that work well for the campaign. And it's an opportunity also for them to discuss their character ideas with you. If they have a particular idea they've been thinking about, they really like, they can discuss it with you, and you can tell them that's not going to work really well with this campaign, or even, hey, it could work well, but you might want to do this. You can also, use their ideas. If they have ideas, you can use that to help improve your campaign. And also you can become aware, if they're making characters in session zero, which is a common thing I've noticed, then you can learn then about their ideals, their bonds, their flaws, and start thinking about how can I make this part of the adventure. If you do decide to have them make characters in a session zero, then it might be a good idea to also determine or discuss with them at least how their characters come together or will come together. Because let's be honest, tavern, while it works, is a bit overused to think, oh, we mean a tavern, now we're just adventures together for life. It works, but it's one campaign when I was actually a player. One of the most interesting ways I saw that started was each player received a letter telling them to go to a location, and each of those letters was different for each of us. And only when we applied information from every letter together, were we able to solve the puzzle that was at that location. And then it made us work together, learn a bit about each other, and that's good. And a campaign that I'm running in the future, one way that I'm doing it, they are all meeting at the funeral of someone that they all had a connection to. I know it's kind of morbid, but you can use it to just brainstorm. How do you know each other? Do they know each other ahead of time? Whatever. Meeting in a tavern, it can lead to butting heads or stuff, but that's what I'm saying. Session zero is the place to discuss that. Session zeros are also the place to lay out a social contract. And what is a social contract? D&D is meant to be an experience that is fun for everyone. If participants aren't having fun, then your game is probably not going to last long. Whether if it's not been fun for the DM or the players, it probably won't last long. And session zero is the perfect time for you and your players to discuss what they're hoping for, as well as any topics, themes, or behavior they do not like. For example, if you have someone that, this is part of social contract. And sometimes social contracts don't have to be written or stated. Sometimes they form over time, but it is a good idea to figure out if there's limits or there's things. If someone doesn't like particular elements of horror, if they don't like blood, if they don't like certain references, it's a good idea, because it's also the reason why a lot of official adventures lately, a lot of Wizards of the Coast, they try to avoid or not go into things. For example, Candlekeep Mysteries, fun fact, on which none of the NPCs, very few NPCs have their actual gender stated. And that's what they're trying to, but it's part of the thing. You want to know a bit what things people like and don't like, which you're uncomfortable with. If someone's uncomfortable with death, do not run Tomb of Annihilation. Do it not. If someone is uncomfortable with, trying to think of another one, slavery, the beginning of Out of the Abyss might be not a good idea. And so a typical social contract usually implicitly or explicitly goes over the following points. Usually you respect the players by running a game that is fun, fair, and for them, and you allow them to contribute. They'll hopefully get, or they should get, opportunities to shine. And when other players are talking, you should be listening. The players will respect you as the DM and the effort that it takes to create a fun game for everyone. They will allow you to direct the campaign, arbitrate the rules, settle arguments. When you are talking, they are listening. The players will also respect one another, listen to one another, support one another. You should, as players, an issue that I find when someone says they want to play an evil character, they want to play something that doesn't work with the party, it's just a why moment. You want to work together. So that's one of the things that I say you should try to always have. You want the party to at least somewhat get along. If the party doesn't get along, once again, you kind of go back to are people having fun if they don't get along? I mean, no. And next thing, if a player is disrespectful enough to others, or if the players all of a sudden maybe come forward to you and say that they feel you're being disrespectful, the option to dismiss someone from the table or a group should be there. And experience I had once is I ran an adventure over the summer with all new players. I had one player that he barely came up with his own ideas, but he always would yell and criticize others' ideas. And it got to the point where I threw them a puzzle, and he was yelling over to the point where I could not hear the others. It was online, so it was in a voice call. I simply server muted him. He could still listen, but he wasn't making any contribution except for shutting down others. So I server muted him. He got so bothered by this, he ended up leaving, then later coming back and complaining that he had missed things, which was a real, what? Thinking moment. You leave the call and then complain that you didn't hear things. Whose fault is that? But that sometimes what I'm trying to say is sometimes you do have to put a foot down. The other thing is hard and soft limits is what you can see on this slide here. Once you have a social contract, then you want to have a discussion about soft and hard limits. Because it might be better not to have this discussion in the open. This might be something you'd want to have more on an individual basis with the players. A soft limit it's a threat. It's something that you should think twice before you cross. It's something that could create anxiety, fear, and discomfort, but it's not going to traumatize or really hurt someone. It's more something they might not like. Like if, let's say someone, if someone doesn't like snakes, for example, let's say they were terrified of snakes, if you threw a scaly creature, I said that would be a soft limit because then it's not a snake. But if you start go Indiana Jones and throw them to a pit of snakes, then that's more of a hard limit. It's something that you don't want to cross. And every member of a group has their own soft and hard limits. And it's a good idea. You can choose to have everyone at the table be aware of each other's soft and hard limits, but you don't have to. But you as the DM should at least be aware of it. You should know that they are comfortable with what's happening. You should discuss with them. And if something comes up that turns out that is a limit that wasn't considered, then you should encourage players to share it with you privately and allow you to deal with it away from the table. If you could even, one thing that I have seen before, or they mentioned in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but I've seen something similar. What a DM I had before would do, so we didn't have to keep track of everyone's AC and passive perception, we wrote down an index card and we gave it to him and he put it over the DM screen. You could, at the beginning of the session 0, if someone has hard or soft limits, have them put on an index card and give it just for you so you can reference in the future, but it's just for you. And you want to be careful with this because some people's hard and soft limits could be something personal. So you should treat it as such. Common examples of limits. These are common, but they are not limited to. Themes or scenes of sex. Discussions during a session, I would highly recommend against that. exploitation, racial profiling, slavery, violence towards children and animals, swearing, inter-party romance. Those are ones that are often limits in-game. Out of game, this is stuff that you should definitely address if it ever comes up. Unwanted physical contact, throwing dice, shouting, vulgarity, rules lawyering, which I'll get to in a bit. Rules lawyering there's pros and cons to that. Distracting use of cell phones and just being disrespectful to the DM or everyone. And discussing these limits, it's important because it's always possible that someone has a phobia or a trigger that no one is aware of. And you want, as I said earlier, you want it to be fun. You want people to enjoy it. You don't want to make someone feel unsafe or uncomfortable. If it makes someone uncomfortable, if you, by accident, just avoid in the future. And the session zero is the perfect place to start this discussion. And because it could be the only time it's addressed. They may bring up something that's not going to be in your campaign anyway, but knowing about it beforehand and stopping it overall, long-term, that's probably the better way to do it. The next thing, after that one, because that was more of a serious discussion, rules. So Gygax once made the statement that the secret we should never let DMs know is that they don't need rules. And I would say yes and no. As the DM, you are the arbitrator, and now I can discuss rule lawyers. There's two types of rule lawyers. There's ones who thinks that everything should be exactly played the way it's in the source book, and they express frustration when the DM doesn't abide by that. Then there is the other type of rules lawyer. They are familiar with the rules, and they will at times bring it up in a manner because they want to make the DM aware of it and know how the DM will use or not use it. These are good rules lawyers. They might say, hey, how do you use counterspell? How is your interpretation of it? Hey, how do you do passive perception? How do you do this? That they know the rules and they want a good adventure and they want to make sure that they are following the rules of their DM while still being respectful. And when it comes to, I should have got her quote there that I was talking about. And so I didn't change my slides, but that, as I said, when it comes to rules, it's a good idea to listen to your players' opinions. You should listen to them, even though you are in control, but you do have the final say what the rules actually are. If you want to make initiative never be rolled and make it be a passive score, if you want to have hidden cover rules, if you want to have, how can I say it, where long and short rests a short rest is a day and a long rest is a week. If you want to make it where short rests are 5 minutes and long rests are an hour, hey, that's up to you. The rules, they are guidelines. They are guidelines. There's damage off the wall. Yes, there's actually a part in Xanathar's where it mentions Xanathar's had 10 additional little rules are covered or so. The DM is the final arbitrator. The next thing, the roll of dice. So shiny, clickety, clackety math rocks. Yes. Dice are kind of neutral arbitrators. They can determine outcome without giving any bias towards the DM or showing favoritism. And the extent to which you use dice is entirely up to you. However, it's generally a good idea to let players use them because they like rolling dice. Players like to roll dice. By using them, I do not mean making dice towers. That is a bad side. By rolling them. And so there is often 3 approaches you can take when handling dice. Option 1 is where rolling with it. You rely on dice rolls for almost everything. If a player wants to do a task, if they want to do anything, you have them roll for it. And the benefit of this, yes, I know there's no technically crit fail or crit success on that 20 nat 1, but it gives players the sense that anything is possible it makes them see that, hey, it might be unlikely for the little gnome to tackle the giant, but if you have a dice roll for it, then just saying no, it gives a sense that, hey, it might be possible. The drawback of this approach is it can also make players feel like their characters aren't what they think they are. If they have a character that is a known criminal now become adventurer, and you make it where you have to roll a sleight of hand check on a blind NPC and make them fail. Well, are you sure you're really a great criminal? And that's where we get to the second option, which is ignoring the dice. Some DMs only use dice for combat, and they determine success and failure as they like. And they determine whether an action fails or succeeds based on how the players make their case and how creative they are. And this is good because it does encourage some role-playing, but the downside is that no matter how much you tell yourself you are, no DM is completely neutral. A DM is often going to favor certain approaches or solutions to others. And it can sometimes work against it. It makes players feel that you're in control too much. And so it makes it where they might feel there's only one correct way to do something versus coming up with their own unique solution. And then there is option 3. You do a combination of the two. Sometimes you want to use dice to make it feel like the impossible could be possible. Other times you want to rely on what the players already have. But keep in mind this, in the end, dice don't run your game. You run your game. Dice are like rules. They're tools to help keep the action moving, and anytime you can decide that something automatically succeeds, automatically fails, gives advantage, doesn't get advantage. I don't like the fact that you just rolled 2 nat 1s with advantage. Re-roll it. You can do that. Because sometimes, unfortunate things, sometimes the dice gods aren't nice. Sometimes they are too nice. Sometimes they hate you. Sometimes they work with you, etc. So some final tips that I have. As a DM, you are the final authority when it comes to rules, questions, or disputes. And here's some guidelines that can kind of help with that. When you're in doubt with something, if you're not sure, if you don't like something's written, hey, make it up. Sometimes it's better. The main thing, it's better to keep the game moving than get bogged too much down rules of, how does suffocation work? How does breathing underwater? How does blah, blah, blah. Sometimes you go with it. Embrace the shared story. So, as I said earlier, let the players contribute through their words and deeds. If they're reluctant to speak up sometimes, you can always try to ask those players, what is your character doing? Their thing, it's not a competition. You don't win D&D. Sometimes you may not like the things your players do, but you're not trying to compete against them. You're going to referee the rules, run the monsters, keep the story moving. Be consistent and fair. If you decide a rule works a certain way, make sure that it works that way the next time it comes into play. Don't have it where, only these NPCs can't be affected by magic no matter what, but you guys can. Treat the rules and your players in a fair manner. That being said, if you do, maybe the team quit isn't winning. No, if you do make a rule and it turns out that, it's bad or wrong, then you should change it and make your players aware of it. If you decide, we're going to use variant encumbrance, why would you ever do that? But if you decide that, you should make it clear to them. Or, coin weight matters, or blah, 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 blah. Another one, if you're going to make the spells have material components. And that brings the next thing. Modify adventures to suit your taste and the players. Adventure, you shouldn't don't try to make adventure have a prescribed outcome. You can alter it however you want to make it interesting and fun for your group of players. What I've actually said before, someone said, with any Ren module, the worst thing you can do with any Ren module is run it completely 100% as written. Any Ren module, my advice to you, you don't like something, change it. You think something's stupid, take it out. You want to add your own encounter, you want to add your own NPC, do it. Go ahead. Adventure is kind of like the rules, guidelines. You don't have to abide by them all. Also, it's not on here, but Sage Advice Compendium, which you can find online, I think it's on D&D Beyond as a text, but also PDF, is a very valuable resource for if you have any rules questions like, hey, how come wizards have to have their arcane focus, but paladins and clerics just put on their shield? Well, it doesn't make... Sage Advice Compendium, if there's any odd little rule things, really, really, really helpful for going over that. I still have a little bit of time, so I'm also going to say, I talked about house rules. A personal house rule that I have, and I know a lot of others have, but it's not, I don't know if it's mentioned in the DMG or not. It may be. I don't think I've ever read it, though. Death saves. I would advise, this is my house rule, and I like it a lot. Death saves roll in private, or have the DM roll them. And this helps because let's say you have the paladin, and the paladin's gone down, rolling death saves, success, success. Okay, at that point with 2 successes and no fails, the players aren't going to be concerned about, oh, is he hanging on by a thread? If you roll it out in the open, it unintentionally facilitates metagaming to a bit. If you roll it in private, or if they roll in private where only you see it, then it's unsure, is he going to make it or not? But if you choose to incorporate this house rule and you decide I'm going to roll it myself as DM, then that is the one dice roll you cannot fudge or whatever you want. If you roll, say I'm going to roll the death saves for you and you roll a natural 1 and you didn't want to kill them, well, too bad. It's a nat 1, it's 2 failures. Okay. That's the key part of if you choose to use the house rule. I think that's, yes. Is there, also, my favorite monster, one of my favorite monsters is my player's ellipsis. Is there any questions anyone has? Because I see that I do have a few minutes. Let me think, how many minutes do I have? I guess I can stop screen sharing. Stop sharing. Any questions that people have? Yes. Oh, I have exactly 4 minutes. There's your little common sense of being nice. Yes, sometimes there's always going to be, like I just said, sometimes there are going to be, yes, players do like rolling dice, and that's why I like the middle ground of it, where if there's some way that they can roll it where only you see it. Because that is true. Because if you roll it, the one issue with me rolling it, they lose control. They feel less in control of their fate, if that makes sense. They don't feel like I'm doing it. Yes, that's another reason my roll 20 is helpful for that, because you can directly do that. That definitely did. Yes. Yep. But listen, we all think it's funny when all of a sudden the DM has the monster with the recharge ability and they can't get it to recharge. If anyone's ever dealt with that, that's a fun for the players, probably not for the DM. I want my Demi-Lich to howl. I want my dragon to use its breath weapon. Yes, Jack. All right. I don't have anything else. If anyone else, I'm still going to do it for 3 minutes if anyone has any questions. But then after that, monsters. Yeah. If you want to make your own monsters, do that. I cannot make monsters. I just can't make monsters in my own. I've tried homebrewed things. I have homebrewed feats before and magic items. And one time a spell. one time a spell. Homebrewing spells is hard because then you always get the question, what spell level should this be? Because at every spell level, there's some spells that are really good, some that are not as good, and then you're like, okay, how should I make my spell compare to others? Zach, are you ready for yours? Whenever.
Yeah, let's go ahead and take just a short 2 or 3 minute break here. We'll get started with world building right after 1:30.
Okay. Good for me because then I can also get a drink of water, which I need to do. See if I can do this. Do you have a presentation for yours?
I do,
Or
yeah.
does it let you,
I have the screen share ability.
okay, good. I know because I had a lab a 2-person lab for computer science where you can't share your screen. Let's just say it's not fun having to verbalize your code.
Jeez, that sounds rough.
I'm going to mute, and then whenever you are ready, go ahead as I get drinking.
Okay, no, y'all don't understand. I went through the most bullshit academic integrity thing last semester because me and somebody were working together on a project, and this was explicitly like a partner project. And so we were under the assumption that we could turn in like one copy of this project for both of us. But apparently the professor didn't say we could, but he also didn't say we couldn't. So I turned in the code on behalf of 2 of us, and like 3 days later, I get a letter from the Office of Academic Integrity.
Zach, have I told you my story about
Which
Hiddenami?
is so stupid. I mean, I won the trial, but it was so stupid.
Have I told you about Hiddenami with partner stuff? So this teacher decides she's going to give this assignment every week, 2 of them per week. This is going to be 80% of your grade. You work with a partner, but you turn in separately. 2 people turned in things that were too similar. She gave them a -100 on it. Basically, a 0 on it and the next one.
Jeez.
For something that counts 80% of your grade. And then she chose not to have a final. Or made a final optional. So it counted 100%. Yes, you get 2 per week, but 2 zeros on something that counts 100% of your week grade. Yikes.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. Oh, it says you disabled screen sharing, Tyler.
Can you now do it?
Yep, there we go. All righty. So, welcome to World Building Boot Camp. I hope you all are ready. This is going to be a very high-level, brief introduction to how to create your own RPG world for a D&D campaign or some other RPG, or if you want to use it to write like a novel or a short story, this is perfect for you. So, if you want to unmute or put it in the chat, but I want to ask you all a question just to kind of gauge where we're at. But what comes to mind when you hear world building? Minecraft on a more literal level, literally building the world. Nations, attitudes towards magic, culture, geography, yeah, all of those are extremely important. Map making is so much fun, and it is incredibly important, yes. Tavi, you are absolutely correct. That you hit the nail right on the head. World building is writing the setting for a story to take place in. You've got lore, and some more lore, cultures and lore, the political spheres for your cities. Yeah, all of those answers are correct. All of that is world building. There are a lot of different concepts and things that you have to pay attention to when you're developing a world like this. But we're going to go over my top 20 for today. So we're going to go over how to do world building, but first we have to identify what is world building. Well, world building is the process of constructing an imaginary world, sometimes associated with the whole fictional universe. It often involves the creation of maps, a backstory, and races, if one is writing speculative fiction, including social customs and in some cases an invented language for the world. That is the Wikipedia definition of world building. So in a nutshell, world building is you're creating a setting, like Tavi said, you're creating a setting for a story to take place from scratch. It's also, making this setting flexible enough and immersive enough such that the people, events, and emotions in this story can interact with the world that you've created. That is the most important part of world building, is it needs to be flexible and immersive enough to where the story, the people, and your events can interact together with it. So why is world building so important? It's where your story takes place. If you don't have a world, with respect to D&D, if you don't have a world, then you can't have a campaign because there's nowhere for it to take place. So when you create a world, you're providing this really, really nice, ground level setting for developing your story. Things like your characters, your events, the conflicts that will take place over the course of this campaign, the mechanics of how certain things in the world act, things like magic and society and money, stuff like that, how your player NPC and player-to-player interactions are going to go, and also some lore that if you're developing your own campaign, which I think we're going to talk about later on in the Conclave, the lore is going to have an extremely big impact on your campaign and what it's actually going to be. But the most important question that you need to ask when you're doing anything with world building is, how does this affect my players? Because everything that you do when you create a world is going to directly impact your players in some way, shape, or form. So I want to start you off with two methods of world building that were kind of introduced in the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. There's the top-down, which is also called outside-in, and bottom-up, which is called inside-out. So top-down is the more popular method. A lot of people do this, but you start big. You start with this idea that you have for this kingdom or country or whatever, and you start with some very high-level concepts. You can make you can kind of draw just a basic map. You can make your major geographical features, put some towns down, maybe do a little bit of demographics planning, but you start off very specific, very high level. And then you start working your way down towards the specifics. So you start with your entire country. Okay, well, now we go to this region. Once you're finished with this region, you go to this city, and then you start doing your cities, the people that are in the cities, what the cities look like, stuff like that. Some benefits of top-down is everything, because you're starting at such a high level, everything's going to be really, really well integrated and cohesive. You're going to travel from one place to another, and it's going to be everything is just going to flow together, and it's just going to make sense. Everything's going to flow together very, very well. And then, especially if you're starting off at a high level and you go down, you're going to have a list of rules or like customs and, just the overall feel of the world, you're going to have that to work off of as you go down to your lower levels. However, the major drawback of top-down is if you're trying to get started on a campaign and you're doing top-down, it's going to be very, very, very time-consuming to get to your starting point of where you want the campaign to start. That first town or first region is going to take you a while to get to just because there's a lot of setup for it, but it's pretty rewarding because you're going to have most of it already done by the time you actually start working on that general area. And if you don't do top-down correctly, then the world's going to seem way too homogenous. There's not going to be a lot of diversity in, the cultures of your world. There's not going to be a lot of differentiation between towns. It's going to seem like everywhere is the exact same. So bottom up, on the other hand, which is my preferred method, I love doing bottom-up world building, but it's the exact opposite of top-down. You're going to start with, you have this idea for one town or one location. You're going to completely flesh out that town and location, and then you're going to start moving up to your larger regions and eventually the largest scale. So you're going to create, just this single area, and then you're going to incorporate it into the larger and larger and larger areas that you're making, and then eventually you will have the full world. Some benefits of this are you have a small ready-to-use setting almost immediately. So like for your session 1, where your campaign party members, they meet each other, well, you've got your starting town pretty much immediately. And then from there, your players can go, and as they're exploring more parts of the world, you're revealing different towns and different settlements. You're eventually going to incorporate those into one larger world. And as Terry Pratchett said, Terry Pratchett is a very, very successful fantasy author with a lot of big books. He says world building from the bottom up is much more fruitful. You're going to see the fruits of your labor a lot quicker when you do bottom up. You're going to have towns ready to use, and regions and people and customs that are ready to use almost immediately. And honestly, it's so much fun. There's a reason I love doing it. It is so much fun. Yeah, Tyler's exactly right. You start in a small town, work your way out, kind of like a Pokemon adventure. You have your starting location, and then you just go wherever from there. And you can just, you unleash the creative juices, and it is so much fun. However, some drawbacks to this is if you're working on individual locations or individual NPCs, sometimes there's going to be some inconsistencies because you're starting at such a low level. You're not going to have, let's say the languages or the customs of this country completely put together. You're going to have the stuff that corresponds to this one location. And it may not apply to the town that's 50 miles down the road or something. The bottom-up approach does require a lot of planning and attention to detail. So if you're not one of those people who's very good at planning stuff out, you do a lot of improvisation, or you're not very attentive to detail, you're more accustomed to or more comfortable with larger concepts, this probably won't be the method for you. I'd recommend the top-down approach. So if you do work with bottom-up, better be good at improv. That's all I'm saying. So there are a few assumptions that we need to make for this session. The top 5 of these assumptions come straight from the 5th edition DM's Guide. Number 1, pantheons of gods and goddesses oversee the world. Number 2, much of the world is wild and untamed. Number 3, the world is ancient. Number 4, conflict shapes the world's history. And number 5, the world is magical. Those are all extremely important to the proper creation of a world, especially for a 5e campaign. And then 6, 7, and 8 are just some other ones that I've come up with. This world is for a Dungeons and Dragons or other RPG campaign. The world is being made from scratch. So you're starting with literally a blank piece of paper and you're going to town there. And you are making a single world, kingdom, or region instead of an entire multiverse. We're dealing with one plane here because multiplanar world building is on its own separate level, and I tried it once and failed miserably. So we're gonna stick to just doing one for now. But these are core assumptions that we're going to hold true throughout this entire presentation to make this world. So this is my list of the top 20 things that you need to build a world. If you want to take a screenshot here or write these down, these are the topics that we're going to be covering today. Name, population size, demographics, religion and mythology, government, political and social hierarchies, your development level, technology, geography, creation of factions, guilds, secret societies, cults, etc., your languages, your economy, the strengths and weaknesses of your world, prejudices and injustices, the history of and lore of your world, magic in your world, surrounding territories, your feature locations, and finally, we get to the grand finish of it all. You make your maps. Yes, I can post my slides in the Discord. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and get started. Number one, names. Names are extremely important. However, they're not entirely necessary when you're still in the development phase of your worlds. If you have this concept for, a town that's by the river that dumps into a lake, you can make the town, the river, and the lake and all the people inside of it without names. They're not necessary. But when you start actually using this world in a campaign setting, those names are going to be extremely important for obvious reasons. If you do your naming correctly, then it's going to add an extra level of depth and realism to your worlds. Personally, I am terrible with coming up with names because I'm not creative like that. So consider this your shameless fantasynamegenerators.com plug. Emily has hundreds of random name generators that are insanely good on that website. You can just go find the one that you want. They have fantasy name generators. They have locations. They have real name generators. There's also some pop culture stuff in there, so you can find names inspired by Warhammer or Magic the Gathering or Star Trek or stuff like that. But it's a really, really good website that is extremely useful, and I love it. Texas. I love it. But a name can reflect a lot of things. It can be completely random, or you can come up with your name such that it reflects a local culture, a tradition, history, landmarks, or people. Another good thing to consider when naming things is regions with like demographics or like geography can have similar sounding names to kind of add that layer of cohesion in this part of the world, especially if it's isolated from another part, like if it's on the other side of a mountain range. Having all of those names kind of sound the same is going to do a lot. And something that I do that's a hell of a lot of fun is I like translating campaign hints or locations or stuff like that into other languages and making them sound a little bit different and giving those names to locations and NPCs. Because it's always so funny when you don't expect anyone in the group to speak Arabic or something, and you name something that you name something in an Arabic name, and they're like, wait a minute, that means this. And then you kind of have that oh crap moment. It's really fun, but most of the time nobody's going to get it. But it just adds another layer of, oh, that's cool to your world. So names are very, very important, but they're not entirely necessary when you start. Moving up next, we're going to start with our socioeconomic development of the world, our population size. So this can take on two different forms for your top-down and bottom-up approaches. For a top-down, this is going to be how demographically big is this entire world that you're making? Is it this giant kingdom that takes up an entire continent with a population in the hundreds of thousands or even millions? Or if you're doing the bottom-up, it's how big is this starting city or town, or how big is this region? How many people live here? And so the size of your population can greatly influence how you play your campaign. It influences the demographics, NPC behavior, the mood of the campaign, about where you're at, and the events. So think about, if you're in the middle of this giant bustling city in the marketplace, of course, you're going to have merchants that are coming up to your PCs and trying to hustle them all these like crappy knockoff magic items. Or if you're in this very small like fishing hamlet, people are going to be a little more like, who are these people? I don't know what's going on here. Or if you're in like, or consider like you're in a relatively larger town, but it's all completely empty. It's a ghost town. Those all have different feelings to them just because of the population size, and it has a pretty good effect on the mood of your campaign. So things that come with a larger population, you're going to have more demographic diversity, especially if you're looking at it top down. You're going to have more NPC interactions just because there's more people to interact with, and it's going to feel busier, especially if you're in a city. A smaller population is going to have that small town, everybody and his cousin feel, where everybody knows each other. It's going to be like super tight-knit communities. It may even be a little bit exclusive because everybody knows everybody there and they don't know anyone from outside of town. But the interaction that you get between small town NPCs and your PCs are going to be so much better. They're going to be more genuine and intimate, and it's going to feel more RP, you know. And so some things to think about population is, where is this population distributed? Is it only in the cities and towns? Are there people that are living like, you know, in the countryside on large farms? Are there people who just are there people who travel like around that are kind of nomadic? Do people live only in these cities and towns, or do they live kind of everywhere? And how big is big? Because big is relative, you know. When you're looking at a town, you know, 10,000 people in a town is a pretty big town. But 100,000 people in, you know, an entire kingdom isn't really a lot, even though that seems like a big number. So remember your relativity there. So now we get to talk about our demographics. This is what you've established: your population size. You know how big your population is. But now it's time to establish some characteristics to it. These are things like race, gender, socioeconomic class, language, religions, occupations, and your population distribution. And so things like this mostly has a big effect on your player-to-player and player NPC interactions, as well as your character creation. You know, if, say, Dragonborn are extremely rare in this world, then if one of your PCs is a Dragonborn, they're going to get talked to a lot differently than if they were, you know, say, an elf, you know, because Dragonborn in your world are so much more rare than elves. But demographics are going to affect a lot of things from here on out about, you know, your world building. So it's a very, very important, very important aspect to pay attention to. All right, so now we move on to the development level. This is the complexity and safety of society, not only as a whole, but in individual areas relative to human history. So this is a really, really low level but complicated concept that affects pretty much every decision that you're going to make in your world from here on out. You know, is your world, you know, is it sticks and stones? Are we in the Stone Age? You know, are we in like medieval, feudal times? You know, are we looking at steampunk industrial revolution type areas? Are we looking towards the future with like synthwave cyberpunk type world? Or is it some combination of both, where you have you know, knights in shining armor wielding lightsabers driving cars up and down the road? So, you know, it's your world, you do whatever you want. But it's not, the development level is not just that. It's also safety. You know, are people scared to travel between towns because, you know, it's a lawless world, that they're scared they're going to get attacked or shot, or, you know, how safe do they feel on the roads? How safe do they feel in the cities, in the major populated places? What forms of self-defense are there? What sort of weaponry is available? Like I say right there, are we on sticks and stones or space lasers? What are we doing here? So all of these can affect how your player characters go about playing the game, because it's going to affect what resources are available to them. And it's also going to affect your overall mood and the feel of the campaign. Think, playing Titan Quest as opposed to Cyberpunk 2077. Those two games have a very different feel to them just because of, the development level that they're at. Yeah, it's all fun and games until someone pulls out a laser pistol when you're, fighting cavemen. And doing a different style of society, so things like looking to the future with your punks, it can be challenging because there's not a lot of official 5e resources for it, but it's so rewarding when you can pull it off, when your players are having fun with it. But if you want to do this, like I said, it's really challenging. Get prepared to do a lot of homebrew. There's a lot of resources out there to do it if you want to pull it off successfully. But be prepared to do some homebrew because it's challenging, but it's very, very rewarding. So now we get into religion and mythology. Remember our core assumption that the pantheons of gods and goddesses rule the world. The gods and the goddesses, there's a lot of variables that come with them. It's not always like a Greek mythology. Zeus is just the king of the gods, just sitting up on Mount Olympus, throwing thunderbolts down every chance he can get. There's a lot of things that you have to come up with to determine the interaction between your pantheons and their people. Are your gods and goddesses kind of laissez-faire, where they're very hands-off? We created the world, we gave the world power, but we're just going to let it be? Or do they literally have physical forms that walk the earth? Are they challengeable, where you can literally go fight God and get God's power? Or are they omnipotent, where if you screw up in the wrong way, they can just look at you and snap and you just get blasted into oblivion? How do people worship these gods? Is it like a burnt offering and sacrifice, or is it a through word and deed? Are there temples? Are there entire sects devoted to these gods? Do people worship? Do they choose one god out of the pantheon to worship? Do they choose like one or two, or do they worship all of them? Are the pantheons loose or tight? A loose pantheon is kind of like your Greek mythology, where all of these gods exist, and people choose to worship one god or goddess. Each god or goddess has one thing they're responsible for, but it's kind of hard to explain. The DM's guide has a very, very good explanation of it. But think of your Greek and Roman gods and goddesses when you think of a loose pantheon. A tight pantheon, however, is where all of the gods and goddesses work together, or they work completely against each other. So this is where the people of your world will worship either none of those gods or all of them. These gods have they all have extremely close bonds, be it positive or negative, but everybody will worship all of these gods. And then, are there any formal religious structures? Is there like a church that's kind of oversees the land that everybody's a part of? Or is it just like, everybody's in their home doing their own kind of worshiping? So whenever you're creating a pantheon, at a minimum, you need to create one god or goddess for each of the 8 clerical domains. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but the 8 clerical domains, they each need a god or goddess. These can be, you can custom home brew your gods and goddesses, or you can choose them from, say, the Forgotten Realms deities in the player's handbook. Personally, I just do that because, it's right there. Why not use it? But if you want to make your own, gods or goddesses, go ahead. But I highly recommend Chapter 1 of the 5e DM's Guide. It has very, very good advice on how to make gods and goddesses. Next up is languages. This one's pretty simple because there's already plenty of languages given to you by your RPG system. If you have a larger, more demographically diverse world, you're going to need a lot of languages. Some things to think about are your languages localized with many dialects? Are there official languages that everybody speaks that are used by the government? Are people multilingual, or do they just speak the language of their own people? And then something that I find that's really cool to add, like just a little bit of something extra, is throw some personality in language by giving it somatic components. So like maybe when a Dragonborn is speaking Draconic, the way they flick their tail or like wiggle their ears or whatever, maybe that's like that's an additional layer of communication in that language. Or just laugh in J.R.R. Tolkien and create your own language. So government. This one's really, really important. From a top-down perspective, how is the macro scale of your region run? Is it like an autocratic, all-powerful king? Is it ruled by the rich? Is it democratically elected? How is this entire region run? When you're looking at it from a bottom-up perspective, think about it with respect to your city or village. How is it governed? Is it an elected mayor, or is it a council of elders that, if you're the oldest one in the city, congratulations, you get on this council and you're in charge of ruling it. So a few questions to ask when you're looking at governments. Is the world ruled by politics, money, or religion? Are the smart, rich, or divine in power? Are the people represented fairly, or are they ruled with an iron fist? Are the rich in charge, or does the common laborer hold their own destiny? How happy are the governed with their governors? How do the local governments interact with the larger, more powerful governments, if those larger governments exist? Because your world could just be a giant, conglomeration of city-states. But there's a lot of different types of government that are listed on pages 18 and 19 of the DM's guide. Highly recommend going through them. You can even take 2 or 3 of them and create, some combination of those governments that works. But again, it's completely up to you. Now we take a look at the economy, and the economy is not just money, your gold pieces, silver pieces, copper pieces, whatever. It's how that money is obtained, exchanged, and created. So this includes things like the natural resources of your world, the infrastructure, the technology that you have access to in your world, certain industries, etc. Things like, if you have a small town that's in the middle of a giant forest, you can kind of assume that most of their financial income is going to come through like a logging industry or a tree felling industry. So you'll also need to determine which currency you want to use. So if you want to use, most people just use the standard copper, silver, electrum, gold, platinum, even though electrum is stupid. People can use that one. Or if you want to make your own new currency, go ahead. But you'll want to identify a few large industries or markets in your world and where they're popular. Be sure you take note of this for when we talk about guilds and like artisans later. If your world isn't the only one on its plane of existence, what are the major international trade routes? Where are the intranational trade routes between inside of your realm? What about trade by sea? Is that possible? And how easily are specific goods available? What about the rare items? And are some items in the player's handbook just flat out unobtainable because it just doesn't work with your world? All of this is completely up to you, and it affects how your players go about playing the campaign. Let's take a look at political and social hierarchies. So now that we have our basis of, our government, our politics, our demographics, and our economy. So we're going to figure out who the heck runs all this. So who's on the top? Who's on the bottom? And where does the common person fall? Are there some occupations more favorable than others? Why? And hierarchies like this are kind of what run a society like this. Or you can have it to where these hierarchies don't exist at all. It's just completely up to you. If you do make a hierarchy, you'll need to figure out if it's a loose hierarchy or if it's restrictive. A loose hierarchy, it's very easy to move between the segments. It's very easy to move up, but it's just as easy to move down. But in a restrictive hierarchy, if you're born into, the upper class, you're not leaving the upper class unless you do something incredibly stupid. Or if you're born into the lower class, you're not leaving the lower class unless you get extremely lucky. How do people move between classes, if it's possible at all? But remember that your player characters can fit in everywhere into a political and social hierarchy. And these from, maybe you have a player that's a noble born to, the royal lineage, or one that grew up on the streets as an urchin or a criminal, or one who's a very skilled laborer and part of an artisan's guild. And this goes directly hand in hand with our social hierarchies. The social and the political hierarchies tie into each other very, very commonly. And so the social hierarchy reflects where one fits into society because of like your job or your lifestyle or your title. Most of the things to question about a social hierarchy is what puts someone in a higher social class than another person? Why are they there? Does money equal power? If you're rich, do you just automatically have more power than the people who don't? And are there certain untouchables, the people in society that are kind of like you see them and you just walk the other direction? But we're going to touch more on that when we talk about prejudices and injustices in the world later on. And as always, when you're thinking about hierarchies like this and everything, the main question you should be asking is, how does this affect my players? So this is a hierarchy from a world that I've been working on for a few years now called Nephralia. But there you can see the very upper class. You have the king, the queen, and the royal family. Right below them, the Council of Eight, which is like the main governing body for the world, with the chancellors. Then you have your local rulers and nobles, your court justices, and then you work your way pretty much down through the ranks for the middle class, where you have your middle-ranking military officers and diplomats. You have your philosophers and writers, explorers, your common middle class, which is your soldiery, your skilled laborers and guild managers, and your artisans. And then working down to the lower class, you have your unskilled and manual laborers, like your street workers, your farmers, and you have your peasants. And then finally, the untouchables, you have your criminals and urchins. And then in my world, people hate orcs like there's no tomorrow. So the orcs and half-orcs are extremely rare, but they are the untouchables of society. So this is an example of a good socio-political hierarchy, but again, that all completely depends on your government, your demographics, your economy, everything else that you make. So now we're going to start talking about factions, guilds, and other prominent groups. So these include things like temples, factions, orders, cults, secret societies, but all of these are necessary in any fantasy setting. A lot of factions and guilds are more powerful or influential than others. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider when you're making a group like this. Is this group, is it public? Is it publicly advertised that anyone who qualifies can join, or anybody at all can join? And it's just like this, common brotherhood for, flower picking or whatever. I don't know. Is it restricted access? Is it like an artisan's guild where you have to prove your worth to get into this guild? You have to be good enough at something, or like you have to know people to get into it. Or is it a completely secret society that stays very, very hush-hush and like their existence is reduced to rumors? Is your guild or faction good or evil aligned? Do they work for the betterment of society? Do they work for the betterment of its people? Or do they do the opposite? Do they work to destroy society because of a disagreement? Do they see something that's wrong with society and try to bring it down? Does it benefit the public or just its members? Is it something that's, philanthropic, I think is how you say that works for the betterment of the people around it? Or is it something that, it just helps its members? It's got members benefits and like, that's it. Is this guild localized? Is it just within like a town or a region? Or is it a completely nationwide, like really popular, really powerful group? But some things to think about when you're making this, and this comes from the DM's guide, is you need a faction name, a motto, the beliefs of that group, the goals of that group, and then a few side quests just in case. I like throwing a few side quests in just because you never know what sort of player characters are going to be involved in this group, or if you're going to run into this group. But just to throw some additional plot hooks in there, or like a side quest. I also highly recommend using the renown and piety mechanics in the DM's guide. You can find those on page 22. especially if you have player characters that are within a relatively larger faction or guild. That adds a different layer to the game that can be really, really useful and cool. Looking at technology now. So this is not to be confused with the development level, which we're going to talk about next, but they do go hand in hand. So this is how advanced tools have become to solve problems. This is fully dependent on the development level of the world that you picked a few slides ago. You know, like I said, if you want to have space lasers when you have knights in shining armor and castles and stuff, have at it. It doesn't really make sense, but it's your world. But when you are considering technology, this does not include spell casting magic. But the technology that you choose should be familiar, should be not unlimited power, tied back. You should be able to tie it back into society as a whole. It should be impactful upon the course of the campaign, but not really so much as to drive the course of the plot. So think, you know, like the hyperdrive from Star Wars. You know, it drives the plot. It's how people are able to get between systems so fast and so efficiently, but it doesn't drive the course of the campaign or the plot. But technology can include special swords or magic items, but it does not reflect, like, you know, your spell casting. So now we're wrapping up the socioeconomic part of our world, but we're going to do one final analysis of our strengths and weaknesses. And this is always done from a top-down view, because at this point, you should, if you started top-down, you should be going lower level and looking at some individual cities and regions. If you started bottom-up, you should begin kind of tying your regions and cities together to create a larger society. And so this is just where you do an analysis from the top down on what does your world do well? What does it thrive in? What makes it good? You know, what makes its people happy? Why is it a successful world? And then you look at its weaknesses. What does your world not do well? Is there something that it lacks in? Are people struggling with something? What causes unhappiness, and can these be rectified? This isn't a meta analysis like, oh, I didn't do this properly, or I did really well on this. This is with respect to the world, you know, as an entity. And so it's going to help identify not only where you need to do more work on because you realize that you're missing something, but it also opens the doors to more complex player and NPC backgrounds and quests. You know, if a player character comes from an unjust, you know, city, that can be a part of their background. You know, maybe there's a really, really poor city because the city, you know, 10 miles away from it just sucks all the money away from it. That can lead to a really nice plot hook as well, where you start playing Robin Hood. But remember, the biggest thing here when you're looking at this is your world is not supposed to be perfect. You're not making a utopia. Your world has to have flaws in it, or else you're not going to have the conflict in the world to make a campaign. And so now the last socioeconomic thing that we're going to look at is prejudices and injustices. This one's kind of tough because some of these are really, really hard to put in a world, especially if they're real world issues. But if done correctly, having a really nice, like nicely developed prejudice or injustice in the world can drive a plot and add just a little something that's a little something to the world that makes it, you know, much more interesting for the players to play through. And so ponder these questions if you think about making one of these. What are the sort of issues that arise or are prevalent in your world that can be resolved, but are not able to be resolved or choose not to be resolved by somebody? Are there certain groups that are discriminated against by others? Maybe people really, really, really hate blacksmiths. I don't know. What sort of cultures or groups exist that oppress other cultures or groups? And is this something that's been reflected throughout the entire history of your realm? Or is it something that's relatively new? But my warning to you all is, like I said earlier, be wise with your decisions. Societal complicity to injustice can lead to a really, really good plot hook or a PC motive or PC NPC interactions, or it can lead to a really, really cool faction. But it can also just as easily destroy your world. Because if you decide that everybody in your world, hates orcs, but there's no like driving factor behind it, they hate orcs just to hate orcs, then that's just like, why is it there? And it doesn't make sense. If you do include like a prejudice or injustice in your world that the players will interact with, like Tyler said earlier, with the social contracts and the limits, if it's something that reflects a real world problem like racism or sexism or stuff like that, you consider giving your players a trigger warning or talking about this to them in session 0, because if some of your players are uncomfortable with dealing with topics like this, you're probably not going to want to include it, because then that's not fun if if it's something that sets off a trigger from one of your players. Yeah, Michael, you are absolutely correct. Why is the absolute number one question you should be? Well, I give it the number 2 question. The number 1 question is, how does this affect my players? I'd say that's a very, very close number 2, but it is an incredibly important question. Why am I doing this, and what is this doing for my world? And finally, you're going to want to create like a brief working history of your world. This answers the question, how did we get here? This is one of the most important aspects of your world building, because it's how your world got here, and it's why it is the way it is now. So at a minimum, things you should include are your world's triumphs, shortcomings, victories, and losses. And things like wars, famines, natural disasters, great technological improvements, past leaders and their impacts, the rise and fall of government, conflict and cooperation, religious history, mythology, how all this history is recorded and passed down, and anything that you can include to get your world to where it is now. This can be something that's as simple as like a paragraph that you give to your players to read up on in session 0, or you can do like me and write like a 10-page history of this world, because I'm a loser who had way too much time on my hands during quarantine. But this is really, really important for the understanding of your PCs about the world that they're going to be playing in. Now we get to talk about magic. This is massive. Magic is huge, because remember, one of our core assumptions is that the world is magical. Magic is crucial to building a living, breathing world. I highly recommend reading the DM's Guide, page 24, the section on magic, because that explains magic a heck of a lot better than I ever will. But it has a lot of questions about, the role of magic in your world. Is it socially acceptable to use magic? Is it widespread, or can only a few people use it? Is it something that's regulated? Is it, something that people believe is supernatural and comes from the gods and the goddesses, or is it something that can be explained? But I highly recommend reading the DM's Guide, page 24. They have a whole section on magic. That's a really, really good. It has a really good list of questions to answer when making your world. But a few other things to consider that I came up with is, are there certain forms of magic that are taboo? Bringing people back to life. That's a huge ethical implication. There's a lot of ethical dilemmas that you're going to run into from the use of magic. In worlds where magic is uncommon, is there like a magic black market where, meet me the corner of these 2 streets at 10 o'clock tonight, and, I'll transmute an emerald for you to sell or something. But also, where is this magical power derived from? All right, now getting into the last few things, let's start getting physical. Let's talk about the geography of your world. Now that we have our entire socioeconomic world put together, we know who and what isn't. We know who is in the world, where they are, and why and how they got there. Let's do the what. What does it look like? So this includes things like shape, size, climate, major landmarks and features. We'll talk about that next. You're going to want to start thinking about what cities are connected, how they're connected, where are they located? Are things located on rivers? Is it in the middle of a field? Is your world landlocked, or is it its own island or continent? And you're going to want to think about your demographic and population distributions with respect to everything that I just mentioned. Start thinking about your location names as well if you haven't already. So this is step one to getting to our last step, which is map making. So now we talk about our town, cities, landmarks, and features. We can start delving deeper into the individual small-scale parts and what does our world actually look like. You're going to want to identify which major geographical features you want to include, because everybody has seen this poster from, your old middle and high school textbooks or whatever. But start thinking about which of these are going to show up in your world and where. Start fleshing out your cities using the socioeconomic attributes you derived earlier. What do these settlements look like? Where are they? How big are they? Is there an organized street plan, or is it kind of like nilly-willy? Where are your different districts? Where's your market? Where's your living areas? Stuff like that. And so you're going to want to start drawing the connections between these major towns and cities that you're building and the geography around them. Think about their interactions with not only the land, but with the towns and people around them. And finally, where is the seat of the government? Where is everything ruled out of? So once you have all that checked off, you're really, really close to making a world. Last thing you need to do is figure out surrounding territories. So think about all the stuff we just talked about with respect to the areas surrounding your kingdom or your region or your nation. But on a much higher level, you don't have to go through a complete world building process for them. But think about the relationships between your realm and the one next door. Friend or foe, is it a very tense, peaceful relationship that can snap at any time, or are the two leaders like buddy? How far apart are they? Is it like a hop the border type beat, or is it a multi-week ocean journey? Have they ever been in conflict? Is it like a big brother? Is it like a big brother relationship or a big bully? But something else you want to think about is, if you're making these surrounding territories in your world, your PCs can come from them as well if they want to. They can come from, another town, another kingdom, and just be on vacation in yours when, the campaign starts. So think about that. And finally, we get to put the last few bricks together, and you finally get to make your maps. This is the most fun part of world making, in my opinion. I love making maps. So much fun, holy cow. But it is very, very hard. I highly recommend, if you want to do digital maps, I highly, highly recommend this website called Incarnate. It is a paid service for their full website, but their free features are still really, really good. It makes map making stupid easy, and I highly recommend using them. They're great. Another thing that I recommend for map making is the dice method, where you reach into your dice bag, you grab a handful of dice, get a piece of paper, and throw the dice on a piece of paper, and you start tracing around the dice. And then say if a D4 lands somewhere, there's a lake. Or if you have a bunch of D6s, there's a mountain range. But it's a really neat way to quasi-randomly make maps. It's really, really easy. But your maps are very, very important because they tie together everything physically. And it's a really nice visual reward for all the hard work that you've put into your world, and an invaluable tool for any campaign. Like Tyler said before, maps are extremely important. And like I've said multiple times before, they're really, really fun to make. But remember all of your scales when you're making maps. If you want to make a city map, I use this generator, I think you pronounce it Watabu or something, I don't know. But this guy has a generator that will make random maps for you. And it's really, really cool and simple to use. I really like it. So congratulations, you now have a fully fleshed out world that is yours to use for your campaign. It's a product of your imagination, but most importantly, it is not static. It's something that's not changing. It's something that you're going to have to change it, mold it, build on it, refine a few things as you keep playing through your campaign. So whenever you're making your stuff for your world, just remember that some things may have to change. So now you have this world, go make a campaign, go write a novel, go direct a movie, go do whatever you want with it. We're going to learn how to write a campaign module later this afternoon as well. But this was a very high-level introduction to the process of world building. I really, really recommend reading, like hard reading, the DM's Guide Chapter 1 for world building. I'm also a fan of the 3rd and 3.5 edition DM's Guides because they have a lot of world building content in them that's really good. I also like the r/world building sub that I'm pretty active on. It's a subreddit devoted entirely to world building, really, really really useful, a lot of resources and a lot of people who really, really know what they're doing there to answer your questions. But if you really want to go all the way with this world, I highly recommend going to this link that's at the bottom here, the Zaharam Chappelle Perunis Ethnographical Questionnaire. It is a 500 and something question survey. It is really long, but if you can answer every single one of those questions and keep those answers like continuous between your sections, then if you can answer all of those, it's pretty much globally understood that you have a perfect world that you have made. Like, you're good to go. So for now, start off with these 20 steps that I showed you. I'll post the PowerPoints probably right after this in the TigeRPG homebrew chat. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me. But yeah, that's how to make a world. Go do it. It's a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Woo.
Yeah, Corey, that's a really, really good point. So Corey said to get players invested, let them help with the world building too. Your players are going to be playing in the world that you're making. So if they have input of things that they want to see, if they have NPC ideas or they want to see certain things, go ahead and throw that in there as well, because after all, like Tyler said before, when you make this campaign, you're writing a story for them to play through. It's all about the players, and that also ties back into the number one question of world building, which is how does this affect the players? So thank you guys for listening. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Discord or ping me. I'm going to go ahead and upload this PowerPoint so y'all can have it for later. Tyler, who's up next?
Next up, I'm pretty sure, is Rachel.
Hello. We'll go ahead and start in about 5 minutes. I need to go to the bathroom and make sure everything's ready.
Okay. A reminder, even though I said at the beginning that if, I know this is going to go for a while, a lot of your Saturday afternoon. So if someone does, if you do need to leave early, don't think, oh, because I leave early, I don't think that I can participate in winning Book Your Dice. If you leave early, just send me a message, and when it's done, I'll send you the link for the form when it's all done. Just put it out there if someone is up. Happy to.
Thank you, guys. All right, PowerPoint is in the homebrew chat.
Oh, you hear all notifications now, aren't you, Zach? Whenever someone... Do you hear when someone joins?
Yeah.
The beam?
Yeah.
I can stop that now if you want me to. Jackie, it's going to be when Rachel is ready.
All right. I think I am ready. I'll wait one more minute in case people are off to the bathroom.
Do you just, I don't know, if you have, or you have any sort of presentation? Because apparently sometimes it doesn't let you screen share unless you have co-host permission. So if you do, then I can do that. Or if you don't.
Yeah, I don't have anything visual outside of myself, of course.
Okay.
I just have written notes. Most of what I'll be doing is having other people participate. So hopefully you guys will be willing to do so. Oh yes, I do have a dog. Here, I'll make sure I'm out of the way for her, so the star of the video may be visible. All right, it is now 2:30. I will be telling you guys how to make interesting NPCs, or at least give you a couple tips if you already know how. This is a fantasy world whenever you're going to be playing, most likely anyways, but any character within your universe should still be somewhat realistic in the sense that they should have realistic motivations, realistic personality traits, and other such things. It doesn't say that they can't be an unlikely character. They should be believable to some degree. So the first thing you're probably going to need is a realistic goal and motivation for any NPC. Not all motivations are going to be super interesting, so you're going to find the blacksmith who perhaps they just want to make enough money for their family to get by. And then you're going to have something a little more complicated with maybe the bard in the tavern. He's trying to save up enough money to go to the bard college, you know. And then you're going to have motivations that are as complicated as the wizard apprentice trying to complete their thesis on metaphysical soul entanglement peripaths through any means possible. Just keep in mind that if you want them to be a really interesting NPC, you're going to want at least a couple motivations. They don't have to be groundbreaking or anything, or even that dissimilar to each other. Let's return to the wizard trying to complete their thesis. That's their main goal, but they probably also have other goals, aspirations, and quirks that can interact or affect how they interact with people. Yeah, grad students, I know. So to make them a little less two-dimensional, you can have things like perhaps they really hate necromancy. They want to complete this thesis, but they despise necromancy by all means. So they're trying to go about it without even touching the stuff, which might make it a little bit more difficult. So they're asking the party perhaps to go find something that has to do with enchantment or abjuration. And something else that you could do is if you have a character and you're trying to develop something and you don't have a lot of time. I do a lot of improv, so a lot of stuff that I do, I'm making on the fly. So in order to do that with characters is you need a personality trait really quickly. Something you could do is get percentiles. I do this very frequently. You say something like, all right, this person, and then you need to know, are they happy? Are they sad? Are they extroverted? Are they introverted? Roll a percentile. So right here I have a 65. They're a little bit friendlier than usual. You could also do this with physical traits, anything else that you could possibly think of. So I'll first make a situation. Let's say that the party needs to interact with the local tavern keeper. Someone, please, take the role of this local tavern keeper. Any volunteers? Oh no, the crickets.
I can keep a tavern, I guess.
All right. So let's start with, how friendly is this tavern keeper? You tell me.
Not very friendly.
Okay. So I will begin. I am the head of the party. Hello, Tavern Keep. We're here for your greatest beers.
All right. I'm glad to see more customers. Greatest beers, okay. What exactly are you looking for?
A pale ale, perhaps?
Okay, sure. I could do one of those. It'll cost you... Does everybody want one, or is it just going to be you?
I'll go ahead and make another note while we're speaking of this. A good way to add a little bit more pizzazz to any character that you're creating is to give them a voice. Voices could be a little bit difficult because often you'll want to do an accent, but not everyone's really great at doing accents. It's not for everyone, and it's perfectly fine if you're not. But you could do things like how low the voice is, or how high the voice is, or how slow and mellow it is, or how very quick and excited and speedy it is. With a tavern keep, it's obviously not going to be too out of the way, but Zach, why don't you go ahead and try to create an interesting voice for this tavern keep?
All right. So, let's see. How many of you were there? Looks like 3? 4? I'm going to go with 4 just in case. All right. 4 it'll be.
Awesome. We'll also have other traits to go with characters, such as any sort of background motivations. And this will happen in every single character, even with something as simple as the tavern keep. So what is something that this tavern keep keeps in mind in the back, outside of just serving customers?
Well, to go kind of right out and say it, he'd kind of be just focused on keeping the place open. He might be kind of serving customers there, but I think primary motivation is he has his own tavern, he can buy as much alcohol as he wants, and he can dip into his own stash as much as he wants.
Okay, yeah. So he wishes to maintain the tavern and also dip in just a little bit with his own personal stash. And with that, we already have a tavern keep that's a little more interesting than just some random Joe Schmo that you had to add in. This time we'll go a little bit more complicated. We'll go with a minor antagonist. Would someone like to take a minor antagonist and help plan them out?
I can attempt to do so.
Okay, second Zach of the day. So this antagonist, they're trying to find an item that the party is also looking for. So they're more of a rival, not necessarily full antagonist. What is their main motivation?
Is this item like a magic item?
It is a magical item. It's an amulet.
I'm going to say go find it and sell it on the black market.
All right, so their primary motivation is greed. And that's always a good thing. However, even people whose main motivation is just as simple as greed, they also do tend to have a lesser motivation for why they're doing that specific thing. So perhaps this amulet has some sort of importance to another rival of theirs, and they're trying to get it out of spite. Or maybe their rival, the party, they just really hate them for some reason. So they're trying to spitefully get this magical item away from them. It's not just greed. There's also that other extra little level. What were they trying to do with... Yeah, what are they trying to do with the money as well? And that can be an extra lower level motivation. Sometimes it is just as much as greed. It could just be that simple. Or it could be something a little more complicated, like they have a family member they're trying to support, which is somewhat basic, or they're trying to, again, go back to a college and achieve that goal. Or they're trying to buy something that's even more powerful that they know will help them achieve their desires. Or they're trying to buy a Lambo, yeah. You gotta get that nice swag carriage going on. Or they could be, there's a lot of things you could go with it. Okay, now let's go with a very major antagonist. This is the big bad. Lower level NPCs, they could be a little simple with their motivations. They don't have to be super complex, just wanting to support their family or just being greedy or just being a little bit more spiteful than usual. That's perfectly fine. But let's go with higher level NPC. This is someone that we're going to be interacting with a lot more than usual. So let's start with what is a first motivation that a big bad would have. They're usually conflicting. You'll want to be able to empathize with the big bad just a little bit to add a little bit more spice. Not always, but it is very good if you're able to do that. Revenge. Ooh, would this be revenge on the party, or would this be revenge on something else? Perhaps the government. Perhaps they're trying to overthrow the government, for example.
Probably depends on what scale we're going for. If we're going for a shorter campaign that maybe a lower level, it might be a local government, maybe a corrupt noble that he hates. Or at a higher level, maybe it's the gods themselves.
Okay, let's go with, this is going to be an epic campaign. This character is attempting to overthrow the seat of a god that they despise. The party, for whatever their motivations are, dislike this. But what's a reason that we can empathize with this character? Why do they want to overthrow the gods?
Maybe the god gave them a punishment that they thought was unfair.
Grief of a lost one. So they had a punishment. They were a follower of this god, you know. And as a punishment, their son was taken from them. And in their rage, they decided to accumulate all the power that they could to avenge their dead son. And they could have another side plot, like perhaps they're trying to find a philosopher's stone or something to revive their son, and then that doesn't work. So they instead continue on their quest to get revenge on them. So just by having these base motivations and a little more flavors to them, you can find all sorts of Annabelle. And an annoying dog as well. They have all sorts of different motivations that will drive different little plot things forward. And going back to this larger character, whenever you have a more distinctive character, you'll want to get them a very specific voice that is very distinctive to them. For example, I have this one character in a campaign that I used to be in. And their voice is incredibly distinctive, and even if a different person is voicing them, the players instantly know who it is, just because I don't use that voice for anyone else. And so having that for an important NPC will definitely trigger that note of, oh, this is them, that's important. We need to remember this. That's who that is. And it can make them a little more interesting, add a little more pizzazz to that in particular. And that's where using accents does come into a lot of help, because it's a lot easier to do a voice with an accent that is unique than it is just a voice that's like low and gruff or high-pitched and sing-songy. Oh, regions are also very important for voices as well. Annabelle, hush! Because you could have a specific accent in a certain region, or a specific manner of speaking, like perhaps everyone there is always very quick to speak and talking very quickly with staccato to their notes. Or they could be very slow and relaxed speakers. That's just something that generally happens there. And regions also affect how exactly characters are. So we'll go back to the world building bit that someone, I think his name was also Zach, did. Yeah. The region affects the characters within that region by a good bit. So again, there's like prejudices A lot of characters within that region could have a certain prejudice against elves, for example, or perhaps they really like this one specific deity and they worship them, and everything they do is centered around this deity. The deity didn't come to their aid when they needed it. Oh yeah, that would also be one. So going back to the big bad, they probably lived in this region where everyone worshipped this one specific deity, and so it was like an even greater cultural ruin to them because they expected this deity and they grew up thinking that the deity would help them, and then everything that they grew up on was just shattered. So we'll need some other smaller traits as well if we're going to have an interesting NPC. Little quirks to their character, something that will make them really stand out. So what's a quirk that this big bad has? Quirks are also good for smaller characters as well to make them more interesting. But what's a quirk that the big bad here has? Something that could perhaps drive the plot as well. Not all quirks will drive the plot, but some do have the potential for it. I'll take any volunteers. They're always a gentleman. They're always incredibly polite whenever they speak to the party and about the deity that they absolutely despise. They're always very calm, collected, very patient as well. And so the one time the party sees them absolutely crack, then they'll know shit's gonna go down. So having traits like this and then doing a defiance of expectations with that trait can be a very good hallmark of something happening, something that is very important and needs to stand out. And of course, big bads aren't the only characters that you're going to be encountering. NPCs are a very important method in driving forward the plot overall, even outside of just the person you're fighting against or the person that's going to sell you things. NPCs should act as a guide and a push forward on plot reasons. So perhaps parties suck. They're trying to do a wizard heist, steal from this great powerful wizard, except they don't know how to go about it. So perhaps there's this one NPC who overheard their conversation and secretly slips them a couple notes to come meet with them in a dark alley. And then they get together and they have this real long conversation about how exactly to go about it. Or perhaps they just get a couple quick tips here and there on chinks in the warding schemes and stuff. NPCs are very important in this sense because most ways to push forward the plot will have to do with an NPC helping them out. This isn't always the case. They could find, secret runes and messages and other plot devices, but NPCs are definitely a very good way to go about it because it adds that more personal touch to your game. Real quick, does anyone have an NPC they would like to make right now? Or an NPC idea that they have that they want to add into their campaign?
I have an idea that I've think about for a while, this one. So let me explain the reasoning behind this. We all run to the issue
phobias
where
are good. Keep going.
D&D, you only have two hands. We always run to the issue. What if you had a juggler NPC?
NPC.
So as a result, they could push him in the air, use one thing, next turn catch it, repeat, just...
You could definitely do that. That's, again, with NPCs, well, I guess it's not again. With NPCs, you could do things that are definitely not according to the rules that you wouldn't want your players to have the ability to, but you can still add that cool factor into it. So there is this one juggler NPC, and they could be doing all these different tricks, trying to do different things, different attacks with their juggling abilities. And the players shouldn't be able to do that, but it's definitely something cool that you can add in.
Also, fun idea and interaction was if they came to saying, "Ooh, I want to learn to juggle," you could then have a full-on, all right, make it DC 30 sleight of hand. I don't know.
Yeah. You probably shouldn't allow your characters to do a lot of things But NPCs are a way that you could sort of get around that. Because you could have sort of game-breaking abilities through the NPCs without just straight up giving that ability to the players. Because they can be a very temporary addition to the party. What about another NPC? I had an idea I was going to go about, but let's go ahead and do one more NPC. Someone that will be interacting with the party a lot more often.
So something I've had for a while that's both for either a character or an NPC, probably an NPC,
Mm-hmm.
is specifically an NPC that follows more of a obscure god that's the god of the forgotten, essentially. And one of the things that they'd be doing and interacting with is they would either constantly find this person either sleeping on the roads, wandering, and then they encounter them multiple times. But one of the trademark things they'll find is in places of abandonment and forgottenment, cemeteries, places that are now ruins, abandoned towns, anything that could be considered in the name of something that was made and then forgotten. They may find a lantern lit next to it, as the god he considers is considered the Lantern King, or the god of the forgotten things.
Yeah, that one's pretty good. You could definitely use NPCs as sort of side quests in that sense as well, because they could keep encountering this NPC and they don't have any explanation as to why this is really happening. So they may end up going out of their way to investigate this. And you could also have a situation in which you make this really cool NPC like the one that Wes just described. And then the party's just not that interested, which is unfortunate, but it does happen on the odd occasion. And at that point, it's fine to just pick up the pieces and move on. If the party doesn't really want to interact with them, there's not much you could do to force the matter, and you should try to respect the party's desire to not interact with them. This tends to not be the case, but if it happens, it's best to just pick up the pieces and move on. The player's main quest patron. The tricksy, reoccurring Feywild creature that keeps popping up and playing riddle games with the players. Yeah, minor NPCs like this are, except all the riddles are terrible and make no sense. Fey creature will accept any answer as correct. Yeah, definitely a lot of minor characters can just pop in and out of existence like this. And they do add that really good flavor text to the universe. Also, if you're making an NPC, I always feel bad about being mean to my players, but you could be mean to them with your NPCs, and you should try to do that as much as you can. Well, not as much as you can, but you should try to do that every now and then. It might surprise you as well, because your players could end up liking them regardless. For example, I have this one owl NPC that I accidentally created, and it's just an asshole to everyone in the party. It thinks it's the best thing that ever existed. And any hint otherwise is grounds for immediately ignoring you. And the party loves them. Like, all he does is insult them for their intelligence and their subpar plumage, except they absolutely adore one of the rangers in the party made this owl their animal companion because they just adored the NPC so much. So don't be afraid to make kind of mean or despicable NPCs that interact with the party just casually, because it might end up surprising you on how much they like them. It's the same way. If you make a lot of mean NPCs, you should make some nice ones as well, because having just one type of NPC gets a lot boring a lot faster. Chicken air crocker, we're going to talk. Oh man, yeah. Yeah, players get weirdly attached to NPCs. Again, going back to this session 0 thing, you should probably try to avoid killing an NPC if the players get really, really attached to them, depending on what they say in session 0 and like how attached to different NPCs they get. Or you could maybe drop some hints that they might die, and if your party's like absolutely distraught about it, possibly avoid doing that. NPC is an absolute ass to the players. Yeah. Players do get weirdly attached. Do we have any comments or questions at this moment? I'm not saying I'm done yet by any means, but at this moment, do we have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I got a small thing. Basic from that owl thing. You're going to find that the moments that are mostly unscripted, or the NPCs that are mostly unscripted, somehow and sometimes tend to be sometimes the shining moments for players. It always reminds me back to Jim Henderson with when he made Miss Piggy, and the whole concept of her doing karate was literally just a joke bit at one point when they were trying to do a scene, and then it became the whole thing for it. So sometimes that can be a thing for NPCs. They do a little joke thing, and then later you just develop it because it caught on.
Yeah, improv is very good for NPCs because you could just have something that you say as a joke or by accident, and it creates this entire character arc or idea that's completely different from what you initially have planned. That turns out to be a lot better. Random chance is also very good for creating NPCs or other events in general because we could try to be as creative as we want, but we do have our limits. So adding in the random event dice and rolls and all that stuff really does help get the creative gears turning. For more planned events, you could definitely sit down and create these axes of good, evil, these are their motivations, these are their traits. Yeah, you could definitely use NPCs as different hooks for quests in sense of we have to save this NPC. You could completely change the face of their quest through the NPCs. Yeah, that's why I'm a main improv DM. So most of what I do is through improv, and that's where a lot of character moments end up shining. So being able to get into character for these NPCs is a great ability to have. An AI guide for the campaign. That would be an interesting idea, yeah. How about we just talk about some really cool NPC ideas for a moment here? Like the AI guide for campaign. There would probably be a cyberpunk universe for that one, definitely.
Well, I mean, in that case, should we talk about the our modern campaign for a second? The characters we have in that, or NPCs we have in that.
Oh my goodness.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'm playing this one character who has an AI sort of stuck in their head, and they end up being a sort of valuable resource, considering that they are a super intelligent AI. Except in situations like this, as a DM, you have to use the resource pretty sparingly. Otherwise, the players will start to rely on this super intelligent AI guide that they have. So in cases like that, it's a good idea to make them sort of fickle and not want to always help out the players. And if they're not fickle, you'll have to find another reason why they can't help the players out that much. NPCs can be foils to characters as well. Yeah, that's also a good thing. If your party is really good at doing a specific thing and they keep wanting to do that one specific thing, having an NPC that will sort of push their boundaries and try to get them out of that one rut can also help quite a bit. Yeah, I do that a lot as well. I'll have a certain prejudice in this one region, and all of the NPCs I interact with just really hate this one player in the party. It could get a little heavy-handed, so especially when it comes to things like prejudices, you'll want to be a little bit moderate with it or find a way to not have to do it all the time, or find an NPC that they interact with more often that does not have these specific prejudices, or at least is willing to overlook them for the sake of the party. Do we have any other character ideas real quick? The annoying dog that follows the party, constantly screaming.
Well, I mean,
constantly getting into your item pack.
Yeah, adding to the cyberpunk thing, there's also the counterpart, which is Yulov Spetsnov, the Russian kobold that is essentially an artificer that works with Vozok. And all my character really does is just fix shit and make sure Vozok doesn't wander off, essentially, or keeps you safe. Valuable resource and all that. Just resourceful and always trying to move up. So that's always been really fun. Neutral evil and kobolds go together great.
A druid who's trying to accomplish a time travel magic so he can bring back dinosaurs and start his own Jurassic Park. You could definitely turn that into a quest of sorts as well. So even really dumb ideas, don't be afraid to just kind of put them on the back burner and think about them every now and then, because if you think about it just a little bit more and you think of how that could work as far as the world and plots and quests go, you might be able to shoehorn it in just a little bit. So I had this idea for a witch at one point. And I thought, I wonder how I can include this into the game. So I just left it on the back burner. And then I found this event that happened during the game. And I found a way to get them a message through her raven familiar. And now the party is off to go find out who this witch is and what she wants from the party. NPC that always has a random number at the end of their sentences. Have a great day, 72. What did you say your name was again? 56. Could you make a puzzle out of it or make players think there is a puzzle when there isn't? Oh yeah, you could definitely just mess with the players through NPCs as well. While they are a resource, they're not always a reliable resource either. So don't be afraid to mess with your players. And just have fun with it more than anything else. You could put in some characters you never got to use through NPCs, but try not to go too ham, but also make sure you're having fun during it. And if your players don't seem interested, feel free to change it up some as well.
I think the last thing that I found with NPCs is recently when I was running a one-on-one, I had one that was like essentially a close friend to the player in question. And through a series of bad rolls and an encounter that was already slightly planned for said person to go down, they died. And what I got out of it was I got an immense emotional situation of vengeance. And I also ended up getting a mid-tier big bad out of it. So sometimes you need to take opportunities and use the opportunistic nature sometimes that it presents itself on unplanned scenarios of what happens.
Yeah. Speaking of emotional states, a lot of NPCs do tend to have a default emotional state. Not necessarily like they're always just very happy, but when they initially interact with someone, maybe they're just very calm and collected, and that is their outwards appearance, or they're very hyper and excited. That sort of thing. So you do tend to have a default emotional state that they express towards the party. I think I did mention this a little bit earlier as well. And seeing a break in that emotional state tends to be a bit more indicative of something else going on behind the scenes. So that is something that you could plan out for a character. And again, using the dice for this, trying to roll to see what they are, what they're like, can help in creating a lot more interesting of an NPC than otherwise would be if you're simply just making them from out of your head. So trying to find different character traits, especially online, like outside of just happiness, but also spitefulness perhaps, how zealous they are about their religion, if they even have one, and other various traits like that. It's another way to add an extra dimension to your characters. Also, going back to the regional traits, naming your characters is very important. Probably a skill that I should brush up on a little bit more. You could create local regional names for the area and just draw from that list whenever you have just a random NPC you got to add in. That's something I probably should do a little bit more, but it's a very good list or resource to have if you just need a quick name real quick. And also you could create different names sort of based off of that list and what those sound like. for a more important NPC, so it could have that regional trait associated with it. NPC Navi from Zelda that just follows party around saying, "Hey, listen," repeatedly. That probably would be funny for a little while, but you probably also want to avoid annoying your players too much with a very annoying NPC that they start to hate. Don't need to be people. Yeah, they don't have to be people either. Like the owl that I had earlier, they could also just be animate items or anything else they could possibly think of. Undead even. Not every NPC is necessarily a person, quote unquote. You could just have the excitable dog or the ship or anything they could think of. And try not to get too gimmicky with all your NPCs either. Most of them will be at least mostly realistic as far as NPCs go. So not every encounter with an NPC is going to be this really quirky, wild, crazy person. Most of them should be pretty standard, pretty default, so that the more interesting NPCs stand out a lot more to the party.
I think one last NPC I never got to implement, and it was with our group when we did Zombieland USA, was a car that was supposed to be a random encounter. That's technically a mage's car, and while it can't talk, it can use the radio. So it'll simply just, if it talks to you, it plays the radio to talk to you, and it has an entire arching theme of trying to find said wizard that abandoned it. So it has a lot of themes of love when it plays its things and heartbreak. Yeah.
Oh, man. All right, would you guys like to create an important NPC for some imaginary party from scratch right now? More so than just a couple comments here and there. We'll use them as, we already mentioned a big bad, so let's do something, a guide for the party. Someone who's definitely leading them towards the final destination. Guides are an almost essential part of any sort of party or any NPC towards any sort of plot. So let's start with something pretty basic. How old is this character? We can either roll a dice or someone could say out which age they wish them to be. And if no one comments, I'm going to roll a few dice.
Okay, I have an idea. How
Right,
about...
currently we have 5 and 42. Can you beat
I'm
that?
probably thinking around like 25.
Well, we have 2 comments for 5. I think you're being outvoted so far.
Okay.
We did specify years. It's 5 centuries. But just
No, we could go with the 5-year-old guide. It makes not a lot of sense to start with a 5-year-old guide, but even with something that wouldn't initially make sense on a dice roll, you could stop and think about it, and that adds a little bit more of a creative aspect to it as well. Because while you might not think they should be 5 to start with, you might be able to find a reason. So why does a party have a 5-year-old guide leading them around? What does this, actually, yeah, let's go with the race before we do anything else. Some of them grow a lot faster. What race is this guide character of ours? An elf. So that's still like a baby at that point. Oh, man. Do we have any other recommendations? Region better than most adults. Yeah, I was kind of thinking that because a child who knows the region would be a lot more helpful than just some other person from outside of region who is the same age as the party. Eric Rockra. Wasn't that 2 comments for... Okay, Lizard Folk and Eric Rockra. So I'll just roll a percentile. 50 and lower will be Lizard Folk. And we got 81, so we have an Eric Rockra. All right, we have a bird person guide for the party. Since they fly, that does make a good bit of sense. Because they could be able to see things that the party may not have otherwise seen, just from their height advantage. 5-year-old child has been possessed by a demon. The demon is sending players on a quest to find the right required to perform an exorcism and allow it to escape from this vessel to the Imperial plane. Okay, so the party thinks that this is just a weirdly smart child, but they're secretly possessed by a demon. Would that mean that they're actually the big bad in disguise? Or a big bad, at least, as some sort of antagonist, but pretending like they aren't. Morality is relative. All right, how does this character interact with the party typically? Could be the big bad subordinate. Yeah, it could be, yeah. So let's say, how does this character act around the party? Are they very friendly, or are they kind of shy, standoffish? They're Aarakocra, so I guess they would be somewhat adult at that point. So they could have most any sort of personality towards the party. So any ideas on the base personality levels, or at least base interaction levels of how they interact with the party? When creating a character, that's one of the first things you'll want to know, because especially if you're improving, that's one of the first things you'll have to think of, because it's the first thing that's going to occur.
Question: Do we know the gender, so to speak, of Aarakocra?
Here, I'll just roll a dice. Even it's female, odd it's male. If it's 4 or lower, it's something else. That's a 13, so it is a male Aarakocra. Sly, somehow always at the edge of the town when the players leave or the main gates. Shifty but friendly. Okay, so they're a little bit standoffish towards most people, but the party seems to have caught their eye, so they kind of stepped out of the shadows to interact with them. And towards the party, at least, they do seem to be relatively friendly. So what of the party caught their eye? Why does this character wish to interact with the party?
Big stretch. Technically, this character is either from the future or is related to the big bad, and none of them know it, and he's attempting to either help them or he's attempting to find a way to stop them later on.
Party approached the girl when she was crying. I think this is an adult male Aarakocra NPC. One of the party members could easily have an item that's required for this ritual. That's fine. I don't pay attention to myself half the time. Trust issues. Okay, so perhaps they do have this item that he needs, but maybe they're not the only ones with this item, but it's at least a step forward in the right direction for this NPC. Yeah, this poor bird man sitting in the corner sobbing hysterically. All right, now let's create a voice. This is an Aarakocra, so you would expect the voice to be a little more high-pitched and screechy, but that's not necessarily the case for every Aarakocra either. Occasionally give the players a powerful item. Sometimes a powerful item could be a game changer as well. Not necessarily in the sense of mechanics, but plot-wise in the story. They could definitely be used as plot devices. Fired by the big bad, and now he's willing to help bring about his downfall. He got some insider info that can help bring him down. Huh. Alright, so what is this character's voice like? Are we going high-pitched or low-pitched? Let's start with that. We already have some hidden motivations, so we don't need to focus on that quite yet. I don't think I could do a Morgan Freeman voice. I don't believe in myself that much. Now, if you can do a Morgan Freeman voice, you go ahead and do it for everyone. Mute. He could be mute, actually. Yeah. You could definitely have a mute character, and they interact purely through sign language or purely through written words. So if one of your characters knows sign language, that would be a great way to tie in that little caveat. And not many players would know sign language, though. So that's definitely not something to bank on. But sometimes characters do have these interesting side quirks, and you could kind of bring them in through different NPCs. So knowing what your players have and what they do is very important for making some people. So this is a mute Aarakocra. Lower and sporadically. Maybe they don't speak, but they just occasionally call really loudly to get the party's attention. And that makes them pretty difficult to be a guide, though. Yeah, if they're going to be the guide to the party, probably shouldn't have them be mute. I like the idea, but even though it's an idea that we sort of randomly stumbled upon, possibly not the best of plans for a guide character. So even if you want to follow the dice, being able to say, all right, that won't work is also a good idea as well.
So how about they're a minor magic user and they constantly use
Telepathy?
Not telepathy, but like minor illusion. Like they can barely speak because their windpipe's out, so they use minor illusion essentially to make images and words and stuff to show pictures and sort of diagram.
I think maybe a limited use of telepathy. That was once commented by, how do you pronounce that name? Simeon? Plus minor
Simeon.
illusion could be a pretty cool idea for this guide character. So maybe Aarakocras in the region aren't known for the magic, and yet this one weirdly has a lot of it known. So that would add a level of interest. And you can also do sort of like the bottom-up world building that Zach mentioned earlier. This character, they have a lot of magic, and maybe you wouldn't expect an Aarakocra to have that, so you can have it be a trait of the world that Aarakocras don't know magic, and it's because of this one character that you started to make. So NPCs can also tie into various other things, such as world building as well. So what's a minor quirk of this character? As a DM, you could also you don't have to have a mechanical reason for some things that your NPCs could do. Perhaps they could just not use it during combat. And it doesn't quite take a minute to cast, but they have to be in a calmer state of mind and not in combat or whatever. Extreme aversion to standing bodies of water. And that could also affect some things that the party does as well. Because if they want to keep this guide with them, they'll have to account for some of its strange quirks and desires as well. Would anyone else like to take some reins on what this character is like? Disgust at quill pens. So he despises the big bad, and that's why he's helping the party. And also, he wishes his demon self should be taken out of this vessel. Is it demon or devil? Extremely picky alcoholic.
Maybe he's just the big bad's rival, and he wants his power, but he needs help.
Yeah, that could also be a thing. And when making a character, if you have an initial idea, like perhaps you wanted him to just purely despise the big bad, you could always change it up in a couple sessions if it doesn't directly affect the party yet. So perhaps your first idea was, oh yeah, they just hate the big bad. They hate everything about them. And then in a few sessions, if the party didn't find anything that directly countered it, you could just change that and say they're actually a subordinate of the big bad. They have interactions with them. They won't take gold as money payment. They only take fine art and nothing else. Loves different types of wood for quirks that could squint random at times, like when they're happy. Oh man. And there's a certain point where you start to get a little overloaded with quirks as well. So if you have a couple quirks that you have written out ahead of time, you can also decide to drop a few of them, as long as you haven't directly interacted with the party with those quirks yet. If you just think it's going to be a little bit too much. Only wants to be paid in cocaine, but it's not for them. All right, perhaps this guide has a secret friend in the background in that case. Who would that be? Oh, perhaps they are with the big bad. The big bad adores cocaine. It's all they ever do. So they only want to be paid in cocaine because they give it to the big bad. And if the party ever learns of this, perhaps the fact that the Birdman only wants to be paid in cocaine and the big bad loves cocaine, that could be a bit of a hint as to some of their true affiliations. Oh, also add in narrative points that perhaps the party wouldn't have initially seen with an insight check. So let's say that we have this minor rival. You could say that they have this shifty look to their eyes and this glint of greed whenever the mention of gold is brought up. And perhaps this isn't something that most people would be able to insight right away, but you should still add it for narrative reasons because it helps the story go along a bit better, even if you think the characters wouldn't initially be able to figure that out. Some sacrifices for the story should always be allowed. Not full sacrifices, of course, but just a little bit of narrative flair here and there. Keep the big bad off their back like a bribe. Yeah, definitely. So what's the name of this Aarakocra? Something that I always forget to do, but is definitely important for any sort of character. I will accept the first name that's offered. Caw Scree. This Aarakocra's name is Caw Scree. Anyone who calls him anything but Caw Scree shall be screeched at, without mercy. So Caw Scree, he is the party's guide. He's 5 years old. Kakoskery. You know, that can kind of work. Yeah. Accepts payment only in the terms of cocaine. Despises all forms of water. Hates writing utensils. Party doesn't know why. Turns out it's quills. Or maybe he just hates writing in general. Hates all sorts of written form of ink writing because they know it's made with a quill. And they're acting as a guide to the party. What else do we have about this character? Already we do have a good few traits, and if you wanted to, you could start role-playing with this character. Does anyone have anything extra to add to them real quick? What do they look like? Yeah. You also definitely need to figure out what your characters look like. So I'll go ahead and roll a percentile. This is going to be how brightly colored they are. We got a 40, so some colors to them, but nothing too much. Darker light. I got a 41, so they're mid-tones. Probably brown colors, nothing too shocking, but maybe a few plumages of red in the chest. Perhaps they're robin related. And definitely use percentiles if you need to figure out what they look like and you don't initially have an idea. It helps very, very much to just get some ideas down and ready to go. And you can always change them later if you decide you don't like them. And at that point, we have a guide that is able to be used. Caw-Scree, the Robin-esque Aarakocra. Could have a thief background. Yeah. Robin in the Hood. And with that, we have a functional NPC that we could throw in with the party. Do I have any questions for me? Oh yeah, definitely get the party to add input to your NPCs. Everyone has limited creativity. Getting the party to interact with and make NPCs of their own for the game is a great way to get player interaction and help add in things that you would never have thought of in the first place. Do I have any questions? Otherwise, I might be finished. If not, I believe we are done. We're moving on to whoever the next presenter is.
Yes. If that's the case, Aubrey, or is Aubrey here?
I'm here. I have not left.
Okay. Are you ready? If that's
I am. If you could give me until probably just 3:25 to make sure I just have everything, and that should be all I need.
all right. And also make it so you can screen share, because I'm pretty sure you do a presentation.
I've never done this on Zoom, so bear with me because technology does not like me. So.
Okay, also, when you are co-host, if anyone ever joins or leaves, you get to hear a beep. Does that stop?
Okay, did that work? Did I do this correctly?
You did it correctly.
Perfect. All right. I know technology doesn't like me and I don't like it. It's a mutual hate relationship. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started because I am on a bit of a time limit. I have until 4 o'clock basically, so I gotta move. And in the spirit of my presentation being halfway on improv and halfway on writing my own modules, I have written very minimal notes for this presentation, which I am probably going to heavily regret in about 10 minutes, but we're sticking with it and I'm going to do my best. So I am Aubrey McFarland. I run an online D&D group every Friday that's not part of TigeRPG, and an in-person group every Monday that is part of TigeRPG. And the overachiever that I am, I write all of my own modules because I'm poor and I don't have money to buy my own modules because, let's face it, buying original modules are expensive. Being a DM is expensive. With all the books and the dice and the things you need, it can run you like $200 if you want to get new stuff. Like, I need that. I am a college student. I need that money for food. All right. I can't spend that much on DD modules. And since I've done creative writing basically my whole life, I figured if I could just like combine my creative writing and my D&D knowledge, maybe I could save myself some money and write my own modules, which like it's easier said than done, honestly. But I manage. So I always have to start by pulling information from literally anywhere I can, because as much as I would love to say I am the most creative person on the planet, as much as I would love to say I come up with all of my own ideas, I don't. I pull things from video games. I pull things from books. I pull things from generators. The links I have listed on this slide are a bunch of different generators I like to use just for characters, names, anything like that. You'll see I have fantasy name generators listed here because it is a saving grace for literally everything. It's amazing, and that site, I would pledge money to it if I had the cash to do so. So basically, in my opinion, it's not plagiarism if you're not using it for money or using it for your grades, and I'm using it for fun. So I steal from literally everything. I even steal from my own middle school self. I did a lot of creative writing in middle school. So all of the stuff I had in middle school that I've forgotten about, I have saved, and I can just pull all of my weird middle school ideas and make them actually make sense and put them into D&D modules. And so to write my own modules, I kind of have to start with the bare bones because I'm not going to write the same detail of a bot module on my own because that's too much work and I kind of do need to sleep for at least 2 hours every night. So, you know, so breaking a module down into its barest bones, you need to have an actual plot line, a timeline of events that the that the characters go through. You need to have the people that are on that plot line and the place the plot line is in. And that is the barest bones you can get. The more you have, the better, but that's the barest minimum of what you need. You need a plot line. It can be very linear too. If you have to shoehorn your players down a path, you have to. There's nothing wrong with that. Then you need people and your encounters are maps. I tend to draw my own maps. You don't have to. You can search for them, but sometimes it does take a while. And these can all be done in whichever amount of detail that you can manage. Like if you're someone who's really good at writing a plot line, but you're not good at writing characters, then you can focus a lot more on the plot line and do few characters and finagle it back and forth. Or you could, even I've done this, I have a bunch of first edition stuff from my dad who played D&D in college. So he has all his first edition modules. And I will take those, steal the plot line, rewrite it for 5th edition, and use it as 5th edition modules instead because they're already all there. I just have to change all the rules, fix all the encounters, and then it's already there. I don't have to do anything. So it's a really easy way to save some time. And honestly, it's a lot of fun to read old modules and rewrite them in new rules because old modules had some real crazy stuff in them. All right. I cannot even explain to you the amount of times I've looked at a Kuo-toa pyramid and wondered what kind of drugs the author was on when they came up with this. It was just different back then, I guess. I have no idea. So basically, with those 3 building blocks, you have just pretty much an endless amount of possibilities. This is just one example I thought of when I was actually just writing this presentation, but you could put them in an insane wizard's basement, a genetic splicing facility, the SCP IKEA that never ends. I mean, you could literally put them anywhere you want and to solve any problem. And that is gonna seem a little overwhelming at first. But my best advice is just to start. Even if it sucks and makes no sense, eventually you'll come across something that makes a good story beat that you can work off of. And so writing DIY modules are great and it's a load of fun, but there are a lot of problems with it too. You're probably not going to end up writing a lot of extra material because, like I said, you need time to do other things in life. You're going to need information from your module and plan that you never made. Like, you know, I need to know this character's star sign. I didn't write that in their character sheet, so I have to make it up. Finding reference images and maps is the worst part of it. I have spent hours on Google looking through maps trying to find something decent. It's absolutely awful. All right, not fun. However, I've learned to create my own maps, and I do some art myself. So if you're artsy, it helps. You don't have to be, though. It still works any other way. And I know from experience, running your own module means you have to have a lot of tabs open on your computer. So if your computer can't run, 6 instances of Google Chrome, D&D Beyond, and another thing, a Discord and something else, don't do it. Because I've had a module where I've had to have 2 separate Windows boxes, each one with 6 or 7 tabs, and then D&D Beyond in the background. So it takes a lot out of your CPU to keep it all up. And lastly, you're going to need to be pretty good at doing improv in your modules. So improv in D&D is kind of a very loose concept. It takes a lot of different forms. But in Dungeons and Dragons, it's just not knowing what you're doing and making it up as you go. It's having one room of a place built, and then your players decide they want to go into the basement of the tavern for some reason, and then you have to figure out what's in this basement. Who's there? Is there anyone down there? Does this tavern keeper have a dark secret? Is he just a tavern keeper? It just involves a lot of imagination and making things up. And especially when you're writing your own modules, you do this a lot. I had a module that I wrote that was about 3 pages of notes, of like dash notes, and I managed to make that module run for at least 8 sessions off 3 pages of bullet point notes, which was impressive. And the entire way through, I was honestly forgetting what I had done 10 minutes ago and having to look back and take notes as I was doing it, purely because I couldn't remember what I'd said. So being good at improv in D&D isn't just good for those of us who write our own models. It's good for all D&D players and DMs, because I'll tell you from experience, D&D players are very creative. And knowing every single personal detail about every single person in the world isn't possible, let alone practical. You don't have enough space for that. You can make 4 spreadsheets and you're still never going to get it all. So when the inevitable question comes of what this random merchant's family tree is, you have to figure it out on the fly because you don't have this written down. And here's an example. This is Ra. Ra was a Fey satyr man who was intended to deliver a total of 3 lines to help the player solve a puzzle in a room of a labyrinth involving some magic illusionary trees. And the rogue liked the satyr so much, they got into a full conversation that lasted 30 minutes. They got the satyr to follow them out of the labyrinth, and when the rogue learned that she could become a warlock with the patron being the satyr, now we have a warlock because of this satyr. So this satyr has been around for ages now in this group, and I cannot get rid of him. He's here permanently, and he was originally intended to deliver a total of 3 lines. And now he has a 10-page backstory. So depending on the characters your players will latch onto and the questions they ask, it's good to have some backup plans, because there's going to be a point that comes in when they're going to ask you a question, you're going to go, wait, what? I had a character that was just a literal house cat, all right? Just a cat that held a dagger in its mouth and was a rogue. Point of this is they attacked and almost murdered this half-orc lady who was walking nearby, and I had to stat out an entire court case of this cat being sued by this half-orc woman because the area had an actual justice system, and I didn't think about the work I would have to do about making a justice system until I'd already done it, and I regretted it immensely because it took me like 4 straight hours of work just to figure out all of the logistics of this, and the players were there for probably 10 minutes. The D&D gods have cursed me for my hubris, and I live out my life in suffering. So after all of this, I'm sure you guys are wondering if I myself have DIY modules, and of course I do. I have plenty. My Google Drive is an absolute mess, all right? I can't find anything anymore. I have 2 folders, I think, of homebrew stuff, and they're all mixed up and weird, and I'm never going to be able to find anything. But I've included a couple of examples here that if you have any questions about, I would be happy to hear it. And when we're done with this, before I go into questions, I have one more activity I'm going to do that does kind of require a little bit of audience participation, but we'll get there when we get there. So the first one I've included here is Akinar Adventure in College. I took inspiration from My Hero Academia, Dimension 20, Monster High, and like all of those like magic high school things you see everywhere, and made a magical adventuring college for all of these players to go into. I made an entire set of teachers. I made all my own maps and buildings. And a relic held in the vaults beneath the school is starting to take over the teachers in their dreams and bringing an eldritch entity into the real world. And so the players are going to have to end up counteracting that because all of the teachers have been taken over by this weird eldritch deity. And so how I came to this idea is I watched YouTube's Eggford Academy Dimension 20 series and liked it so much, I stole it, refurbished it, flipped it around, and took it for myself. That's about it. And I just took a bunch of other things that I liked and combined it all together, and that's just what we ended up with. I've also included the Druidborn Ruins, which I mentioned to some of the staff of TigeRPG earlier today. The party enters this huge druid town in the middle of these eldritch woods that's ridden with drug abuse. And they end up learning that the area, this forest, is home to a big drug cartel that's producing a hallucinogen that's more effective on magic users and druids. And it doesn't work on the children. So the children of this town have fled and have made a camp where they're being taken care of by a werewolf man. And the werewolf man and the children work together with the party to basically just destroy an entire drug cartel. And this entire idea came from me laughing at the fact that people always think druids are hippie and high all the time. That's the only inspiration for this when I first started writing it. And then it just expanded into be something really incredible and fun. And I will admit, I did have a lot of fun making my group have to figure out how they were producing this drug to figure out how to destroy things. It was oddly fun to roleplay as NPCs that didn't know what was going on because I could be as vague as I wanted and I had an excuse and I never had to explain myself. It was absolutely beautiful. So, as practice for writing my own modules, when I don't have material ready, I will do a thing where I will run one-shots based purely off of words that my players give me before the session starts. So I'm going to ask everyone that's here to send, there's a lot of you, and I'm not going to use all of the words. So just do a couple of words, nouns, anything you want, throw them in the chat. I'll pick a couple and make something out of it. Just on the fly right here while I'm sitting. So pick a couple of things, nouns, verbs, places, themes, locations. I don't care. Pick one or two, type them in the chat, and I'm going to pull a couple. Now, I can't use all of them because there's a lot of you guys, so. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm cutting it off there. Everyone underneath there, I can't use those. I have too much, there's a lot of this. Okay, what do we have? Pirates Cathedral, Cult, Eldritch Ancient, Vacuum, Destiny, Bees, Ocean, Cloud Giants, and Beholder. All right, well, immediately I can see a eldritch being that is in the shape of a beholder being summoned by a cult, right? In a cathedral. That's all things that you could pull together pretty easily from what you've given me. Now, you've also included pirates, ocean, destiny, and bees and cloud giants. So we have this cult in a cathedral trying to summon an eldritch demon that looks like a beholder. So why don't we also have a cloud giant castle over the ocean on a cloud that these pirates are hunting for because they're looking for a magic item called the Scroll of Destiny that will tell them when they will die. There you go. There's a full extended plot line involving everything you've sent me except for bees because the cloud giants are also beekeepers. They keep giant bees. That's their profession. That's how they make their money. So there you go. There's a basic plot line involving everything you just sent me, or at least as much as I could give you in 10 seconds, because I can't do everything. I have a limit. I had players give me, I think, cathedral, coffee, macabre, modern, and then they threw Kirby into the mix. And then they also gave me horror, grandfather clock, and like spiderweb. So I made this entire exorcist encounter where the party is hunting this entity called the Devourer, and they get down to this basement of this church, and demonic Kirby rises from the ashes and is the final boss fight of the module because, believe it or not, someone has actually statted Kirby as a D&D monster. I found that on Google. So it worked perfectly, and it was amazing because I got to fight Demon Kirby. So when I say you can use anything for DIY modules, I mean it. I mean it. And pulling together random words into a module is one of the best ways to practice. Even if you can't do it quickly, and even if it takes a lot of time, just getting a friend to send you like 5 or 6 random nouns and combining them into something is a really good both improv exercise, writing exercise. It's a great thought thing to do. It's a great way to keep your brain sharp. I love doing it. It's a lot of fun for me. For people that aren't as writing savvy as I am, it probably would seem a little more like a chore. Actually, Kirby gained stats and abilities based off the class of the person he ate, I believe is how they did it when I read it. So we would get different abilities based off what class of person he ate is how they ran it in their stat block, if I remember right. But this is what I do when I don't have a module to run and I need to come up with something really quickly. And this is just the way I do it. I'll have people send me things and try and make something out of it. And usually I'll give myself more time than I did now. I'll have a sheet of paper and I'll write all them out and I'll give myself 10 minutes to think about it. But it can be a lot of fun, especially because if you're like me and you make too many characters all the time since you were little, you have a huge collection of backup characters, of base characters that you can take. Like I have a pirate crew already made that I could use for the pirates for this cult for these pirates that are trying to find these cloud giant beekeepers. I have a pirate crew I could use for that already. I have dark mages that could be used as a cult. I don't have an eldritch being. I'd have to find one, but that probably wouldn't be too hard. I'm sure I could find just an evil beholder and just restat it or reskin it. It wouldn't be that hard. So all my style of improv is just making things up as you go because it's a lot of fun. And my style of DMing is a little different because of how I do all this improv. My sessions are very jokey. They're very memey. Sometimes we don't get anything done and the entire session is just us laughing at each other. I had an encounter where in the actual in the Aknar Adventuring Academy module, where the Dragonborn, who was not an artificer, tried to artifice magic runes onto a bong she was making in shop class, rolled terribly, and then the bong exploded. And then she was kicked out of shop class permanently. That happened. Because I just let them do whatever they wanted, and for some reason the Dragonborn wanted to make a bong, and I didn't say no. So now that Dragonborn has the title Bong Breaker in their group, and will keep that title until they change characters. So lots of shenanigans happen if you decide to improv the way I do. So it's hard to deal with, but it's a lot of fun. If you want to know, if you have questions about any of the modules I've told you, anything I've mentioned, if you want to talk to me about a little more in depth about how I write modules, because I couldn't go super into it here, you can find me on the Discord. That's my tag. You can just literally just tag me there, message me, I'll find you. And if you have questions now, I'm happy to answer them. Like, I have time. That's why I hurried to make sure I had some time to answer questions, because I know I went through a lot. I talk fast. I have ADHD, so I talk very quickly. So I might have gone too quick and skipped over something. So
yeah, very quickly. Somebody else who does a lot of improv and stuff, is it very common for you to do the thing where it's like you kind of skeletal what it is and then you just wait for the players' reactions just so you know exactly what you're supposed to expect?
Yeah, a lot of times what'll happen is I'll make the skeleton and the players are like, nah, I don't want it to be a human skeleton. I want this to be an octopus skeleton, which doesn't exist. So they completely diverge from the skeleton I've made entirely, and I have to make them a new one. Or they'll go halfway up the skeleton and go, wait, I want to go another direction. So you'll lose half of it and then have to make another half. But usually you can keep them on a string, sort of, and then wherever they orbit around that string you have to make. But you can usually keep them on a very simple plot line as you go. Even if it does require some DM influence in cheating rolls to make sure they don't accidentally kill the thing they're not supposed to be able to kill, right? But no, as long as you have that skeleton, You can usually improv around that unless your players actively are fighting against it and trying to go another direction, at which point you might want to just go with it. I can try and find that stat block for Demon Kirby. I don't remember where it was. It was just some forum that I looked up in the moment as well. I believe the Kirby got a bonus to strength and an extra melee attack when he had a Barbarian Swallowed. I want to say, I don't know about Zealot, but I know Barbarian was extra strength boost and an extra melee attack. I believe. It has been a long time. It was a while ago.
The reason I mentioned Zealot is because when they're raging, if they drop to 0, they don't die. And I feel like that'd be terrifying for Kirby because then, oh, I'm down to 0. All right. Son, if there's some way to heal myself, then hail something else. Woohoo!
It had the rogue swallowed for most of the encounter, which gave it, extra AC and, double movement speed, which was kind of terrifying, not gonna lie. And then someone in my party in that group is actually someone who's really good at voice acting. So we decided to give Demon Kirby a voice. And the voice will haunt my nightmares until the end of time. Absolutely horrific.
Right. If no one has questions, Barrage, I think Barrage is here. I need to look at participants. I want to say.
Yeah, I saw him in chat.
All right. So I can make it so you can screen share if you give me just 1 second, because I don't know if it let you or not.
Well, there's a screen share button. If I click on that. Nope.
I know, but sometimes it doesn't. Try now.
Yeah, now it's fixed. Cool. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Barrage. Today, I'll be talking to you about planning encounters. So, quick, does everyone see what I'm sharing?
Yes.
I don't think I've actually ever used Zoom before, believe it or not. So, uh-oh. No! Stop. Okay. All right. So, I'll be talking about planning encounters. This might not take the full time, but I'll take questions at the end or just general discussion. If at any point you have a question, I guess please just type in the chat or something, or we can just talk. I think this is the chat. All right, so let's begin. Let's get started. So, planning encounters. So what does that mean? Well, the first thing to consider in D&D or RPGs in general, I'll be talking from the perspective of D&D because that's the one I have the most experience in, but this will work for pretty much any RPG. So what is an encounter? Well, an encounter is a short scene in which the PCs are actively doing something. I think that's the definition from the Pathfinder glossary. So basically, in the most general sense, in D&D, there's a lot of times where it's just open for the players to do whatever they want. And oftentimes this is completely up to the player's discretion, whether they're interacting with some NPCs, whether they're just interacting with each other. But once an encounter breaks out, that usually gives them a specific purpose and something to actually do. So the goal of an encounter generally is to challenge the players and potentially use up their resources. So there's kind of 2 aspects that go into encounters. There's kind of the mechanics of the encounters. So for example, combat's probably the most mechanically intensive encounter you can think of, where you break out into initiative, there's actions, bonus actions, etc. But I think another aspect is flavor, which is more like the artistic side or the creative side of things. So if you know me, you'll know that I greatly prefer the artistic side. So it's really tricky to get, encounter balance can be a really tricky thing, but there are so many resources online that can help you out with that. What's way more important, I think, and way more fun is making it cool. And that's kind of what this presentation is going to be about. All right, so how do you make cool encounters? I think we should look at the 5 W's, all right, for each encounter. So for an encounter, who? This is this who applies for every encounter, and it's who are your PCs. So ultimately, the encounter you make will be your PCs, your player characters interacting with something. So depending on who your player characters are, that'll make a huge difference in the encounter, in the difficulty, how to approach it, and all that stuff. It's best to create an encounter that will be challenging specifically to your PCs and interesting to your PCs. Of course, you shouldn't make the encounter. You shouldn't make it obvious. You should always design your encounter so it seems like it's something naturally in your world. But really, when you're thinking about how it goes, you should be thinking, okay, how will the PCs respond to this specific challenge? All right, that's the who. The what. What kind of encounter is it? So the 3 types of encounters are similar to the 3 pillars, or maybe the 3, I'll say types. It's similar to the 3 pillars of D&D, or RPG in general. That's combat, exploration, and social. So combat encounters, that's probably what you think of when you think of an encounter, right? Just bumping into, the image, just a bunch of goblins. That's an encounter. But there's also exploration, If you're exploring a dungeon, for example, and you walk into a room that has, a spike trap, or that has, water rising, that's still an encounter because your players are actively doing something in that room. Puzzles are another example of an exploration encounter. And finally, social. The players might need to extract information or get on the good social graces of, a king or something. Or maybe they're interacting with a tribe of grung or anything. Those are all can be counted as encounters. Even if it doesn't go to fight, if the players have to actively try to do something, that's still an encounter. When? So how many encounters per day will you have? So actually, a lot of people don't know this, but the Dungeon Master's Guide recommends 6 to 8 combat encounters per adventuring day. I don't know anyone that does that. Even when I was trying my hardest to have 6 to 8, I couldn't do it because after 6, I was like, all right, it's been 3 sessions. I think the players can probably sleep now. So my general rule of thumb is that I try to make 8 encounters per day, period. Not just 8 combat encounters, because it's not going to happen, but 8 encounters in general. 8 distinct activities that the players encounter. No, I didn't actually mean to say encounter there. 8 distinct activities the players bump into. Now the players, if they're sufficiently creative, may create their own encounters, especially if they mess with themselves, but the 8 is what I try to go for. And the reason why they recommend 6 to 8, by the way, is because you want to have some balance between certain classes that are based on that are limited by long rests, so casters, and versus different classes that are based on short rests, such as marshals and warlocks. But realistically, people don't do that many encounters per day. All right, where? What is the setting of the encounter? This is actually probably the second most important part. The first being the why. The setting of the encounter is really what determines the content of the encounter and how to actually make it cool. And we'll be talking a lot about that later. And finally, why? Why is the encounter happening? Right? Is this just a one-off random fight? Is it just meaningless, or does it serve a greater purpose? So all those 5 things are what you need to think about in terms of making any encounter. Oh, section 1.5 looks like I'll be revealing the dirty secret on the easiest way to design an encounter. Are you guys ready? The easiest way to make an encounter is don't. Okay, so this kind of defeats the purpose of my presentation, but there are a lot of resources online you can find that have pre-built encounters. Like literally, just go on Google and search D&D 1000 encounters, or D&D non-combat encounter table, or D&D Arctic encounter, or anything like that. Even if you have dungeons from official campaign books that you like, you can use them. If you see anything like on Critical Role that you like, you can use them. Of course, the more popular the thing you steal from, the more likely your players are to know it. But it is nothing wrong with using a pre-existing thing. Okay, but let's say you want to make your own encounter, or you want to know about which encounter to pick from. Or you found some encounters online, and you take inspiration from them to build your own. So how do you make your own? Well, I'm going to talk to you about the 3, maybe I should say the difficulties of encounters. So the 3 types of encounters that I define are determined by the purpose. There may be other types, some may be like in between, but these are the 3 different groups I think about. I think about random encounters, I think about challenging encounters, and plot encounters. So, a random encounter is one that I think should just be fun, okay? Not every situation your players are going to bump into will be extremely important or difficult, all right? Especially if your players are in a developed world, there's going to be things going on. There's going to be evil doers. There's going to be interesting stuff happening. And your players will just randomly bump into them, okay? And also, your players should generally be stronger than, like, the average person. So, if your players bump into, like, a tribe of goblins, if they're not level 1, they should just destroy them, right? So, not all encounters have to be just extremely difficult. Now, the reason I put random in quotes is because this depends on the DM, of course, but I personally do not like actual random encounters. I don't like the idea of sitting in a D&D session and like, oh, okay, the players are traveling on the road. Let me roll a d20. Oh, look, I got a 18. Let me roll to see what enemy I've got. Oh, wait, look at that, 3 owlbears. Oh, crap, what's an owlbear? And then, like, spending all that time. I don't like doing that. I like setting, for example, for random encounters if the players are traveling, I like thinking, okay, if the players have 1 random encounter, it will be this specific enemy. If they have 2, it will be this specific enemy after that, etc., etc. That just makes it a lot smoother, and you can set up the encounters to actually have some meaning. Now, you can roll for it ahead of time if you want to have some randomness, but I personally don't like rolling during the actual session. So the purpose of a random encounter, if not just for fun, is for setup and contrast. So if every encounter in your campaign is like it's supposed to be important, then none of them will be, right? The things that are important are only cool because they're in contrast with something else. Okay? So if you have a campaign where you only fight like strong giants, eventually the 16th giant you fight won't be as exciting, right? So that's kind of the purpose of these random encounters is to kind of make the other encounters, the more important ones, better. And also setup, you should, if you can, you should make so every encounter is important for the overall narrative. Maybe for random encounters, not super important, but you can always just keep that in the back of your mind. So here's some examples of random encounters, quote unquote random. One is the party stumbles upon a group of goblins that are working for a friend of the big bad evil guy. So that's the final villain, of course. So it's classic. You run into a bunch of goblins, you fight them like maybe 20-30 minute combat at most. But you can always just spice it up by adding an extra element, which is they don't work for the boss directly because that might be too. Maybe the boss doesn't work with like lowly goblins, but like a friend of the boss works with the goblins. Another example: party finds a treasure chest that is clearly trapped, or maybe one that's clearly a mimic. One way to motivate your